Hey guys, tonight we plunge into the dank, wave-thrashed bowels of a convict transport ship, feeling every lurch and spray as salt water sloshes over the crowded deck. And yes, you probably won't survive this without questioning your life choices. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments, because nothing says I'm centered like knowing where I am when you're about to suppress a vomit. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you descend into the ship's hold, the air grows thick with the stench of human misery and rotting provisions. The wooden planks beneath your feet pitch and roll as though the vessel itself is alive, and frankly, it's considering eating you for dinner. You're packed among nearly 100 other convicts, men with leg irons, women clutching ragged shawls, children with hollow eyes. A mainstream historical fact, British penal transportation to Australia began in 1788, sending tens of thousands of convicts across some 15,000 miles of ocean to what they called Botany Bay. But that voyage wasn't a postcard cruise. It was 3 months of salt spray scurvy and the occasional rat nibble. Think of it as a medieval cruise ship, except the pool is briny water you can't swim in, and the entertainment is dying in corners. Below decks, the air is unrelenting, a humid stew of perspiration, unwashed bodies, and the rancid oil of tallow lamps. You slip into your bunk, a narrow plank 2 inches thick, supporting both guilt and dysentery. A quirky detail: some convicts tried to ward off illness by chewing on bits of leather from their shackles, convinced that the iron courage coursing through their veins would keep scurvy at bay. Whether those early DIY iron supplements actually did anything beyond making their breath smell metallic is debatable. Historians still argue whether such fringe remedies were widespread folk medicine or just an excuse for missing dinner. As the ship creaks and groans, you feel the motion in your gut seasickness that makes even the toughest blokes look like startled toddlers. You grip a rope to steady yourself, but it's already snapped, fraying your fingertips. From your bunk, you can hear a man in the corner retching, followed by a soft thud as he collapses. Dysentery is faster than any surgeon lurking below. By the 1790s, surgeons aboard convict ships documented up to 10% mortality rates per voyage, a grim mainstream number that would make modern epidemiologists faint. You think, well, at least I'm not paying for this vacation. Flashbacks of Section 12's escapees flash in your mind, convicts huddling in coastal brush, dreaming of freedom, yet here you are, shackled to a nightmare. You watch as a cockroach the size of your thumbnail scuttles across the floor. A fringe tidbit in action rumor had it that some convicts kept rats as pets, believing rodents absorbed disease so they could survive the voyage. If that's true, you're envying the rats their long lives and cutting-edge hygiene habits. You flick a speck of mold from your sleeve and wonder if it's sour sop or just penicillin waiting to be discovered. Too bad. The ship's medical books are more prescriptive than practical. The hold's single lamp, fueled by rancid tallow, casts jittery shadows that resemble drowning souls reaching for the surface. You cozy into your wooden plank, the rope holding your makeshift mattress straining under your weight, and try to block out the rhythmic slap of water against the hull. It's like trying to fall asleep at a Vegas pool party with live music and screaming children. Yet somewhere beyond these rolling waves, a new land awaits one that promises both land and lash. 5 nights in, you hear the surgeon's knock on the bulkhead. A hush falls over the compartment as he opens a small trap door. His presence means either a vial of clamshell oil to ease scurvy or a diagnosis you don't want. "Anyone suffering boils on their legs?" he asks. A chorus of groans rises. You peer at the few lucky ones free of scurvy's purpling gums and imagine them as gods among mortals. You try to smile, but your gums protest. A mainstream note by mid-voyage surgeons routinely carried supplies of lemon juice to prevent scurvy, a practice that cut mortality rates, but only if the captain didn't accidentally run out after the first week. You think nothing like citrus to keep the scurvy and hope alive. You remember Section 4's cramped hovels of Botany Bay, where makeshift shelters leaked and rodents shared meals with unfortunate souls. But here, in the floating coffin conditions, rival a medieval plague ship. Ventilation is non-existent. You feel your lungs expand with miasmatic dread. The surgeon prods at a man's leg ulcer. Blood seeps onto the wooden floor like spilled wine. You watch stomach churning as he slices away dead flesh with a knife that glints under the dim lamp. If surgical techniques of 1790 were questionable, expect your future kangaroo escape plan to include a traveling barber surgeon and free alcohol to drown the screams. You shift to avoid direct contact with the buckle of a woman's wrist iron. Her cuff clanks against your knee. She offers you a crust of stale bread, whispering, "Save your rations." You look worse than me. You nod, pressing the bread to your lips. It tastes of cardboard soaked in seawater. Hunger claws at your stomach, an ache you can't scratch. A fringe tidbit: some convicts claim that gnawing on wooden beams helped stave off hunger pangs, though it usually just chipped their teeth. You wonder if dental payback is on the horizon. Maybe you'll end up trading teeth for extra gruel. Laughter bubbles up. Despite yourself, a gaunt convict in saffron-stained breeches tells a joke about missing his cellmate's rear end so much that he named a rat after him. The groans of illness and the creak of timber swap for a fleeting moment of humanity. You share a glance here in this smell-soaked darkness. Humor flickers like a stubborn candle. Yet before you can savor the levity, the ship lurches and pitch-pounds you into a heap of bodies. Someone mutters, "Great, now we're pitching for the sharks." Another retorts, "Sharks are polite, they eat last." Rain pelts the deck above, the thunderous sound reverberating through the hull. You wonder if the sea is trying to wash away your sins or just drown you for good measure. A mainstream note: late 18th century convict ships often navigated around Cape Horn, enduring storms so fierce that masts splintered like kindling. You feel the hull shiver, a violent reminder that the ocean doesn't negotiate. It just prowls. A sudden slam of a hatch startles everyone into silence. The cook's voice cuts through. "Fresh meat today, rats for breakfast." You recoil, imagining rodents waddling over your breakfast plate, their whiskers twitching as they nibble at rancid pork fat. A fringe belief: some more desperate convicts tipped rats into pots, convinced that eating the erstwhile hold crew member would make them immune to future infestations. Historians still argue whether such practices were widespread survival tactics or mere folklore clipped from drunken tavern tall tales. You cradle a cup of tepid water given sparingly to prevent scurvy and sip, slowly savoring the taste of nothing. Your throat feels raw from coughing your voice a hymn of despair. You try humming a lullaby your mother sang, but the melody drowns in the hum of rats and the ship's torturous creaks. Somewhere in the distance, a sailor curses as he swabs the deck, footsteps echoing like grim tambourines. Night deepens. A friend leans in to whisper that he's seen phosphorescent plankton glowing beneath the waves' bioluminescent ghosts. You imagine tiny lights dancing in the blackness as if the sea itself is mocking your plight. A quirky detail sailors sometimes thought bioluminescent swirls were signets of drowned souls luring ships to doom. Whether those superstitions were genuine belief or a seafarer's lore remains a stormy debate. Historians still argue whether such tales influenced navigational routes or just fueled pirate legends. You lie down on your plank ear pressed to the wood, listening to the hiss of condensation trickling through the hull. Your body tenses at every groan of the ship, wondering if the next sound will be roaring waves breaching the deck. You recall Section 2's battered feet, trudging Botany Bay's red soil. Tonight's red is in your dreams, a blood moon hovering over an alien land. Before sleep, claims you feel a rough hand on your shoulder. Tomorrow mission's to scrub the deck. Sunlight's your new master. You swat away the hand, muttering, "I'm not Harris Styles, mate, so hands off." He smirks, but you know there's no end to the ordeal. In this floating hell, toil replaces hope, and every sunrise threatens you with another day of survival by a miracle. As you drift into a fevered slumber on your splintered mattress, you dream of sawdust clouds and iron chains. The ship's throbbing beat lulls you into darkness, an almost soothing percussion, until you remember the rats nibbling at your dreams. It's a glimpse of Asylum's edge, an intro to Botany Bay's savage welcome. You awaken, mouth dry, mind reeling, the horizon still miles away, promise of land, both dread and salvation. You grip the edge of your plank, whispering a prayer to saints and sea gods alike. If you survive the hold, you might live to see kangaroos bounce across dusty plains, but you also face the grim possibility of rotting as a forgotten name in a parish register overseas. In this watery oubliette, salvation is as merciless as the rope cutting into your wrists. When dawn breaks, the deck above creaks as men stumble on still slick planks bound for their day's torment. You steel yourself, rising from the plank as though you're auditioning for the world's saddest ballet. Your footsteps echo like a hesitant apology to the sea for daring to stay alive. In that moment, sleep feels like a cruel joke. Close your eyes, and the ocean's nightmares swallow you whole again. You stand on wobbly legs, gaze fixed on the horizon, where a haze of sunlight dares to promise land. But the promise is brittle, made of salt and sweat. You step into the tenuous light heart, pounding with equal parts hope and terror. Because once you leave this half-sunken coffin, there's still Botany Bay's wilderness to greet you. For now, though, the ship's hold remains your crucible, forging you into something unrecognizable, a convict molded by waves' rats, and the hopeful dread of survival. You step onto scorched sand, the sun a merciless overseer, turning every grain into a miniature furnace. Welcome to Botany Bay, where the earth itself seems to roar. Survive this if you can. The heat slaps your face as you trudge forward, shackles clinking with each reluctant step. A mainstream historical fact, Captain Arthur Phillip established the first penal colony at Botany Bay in January 1788. But aliens didn't greet you, only scrubby eucalyptus and the acrid tang of makeshift huts that already smell like despair. You probably won't survive this without wondering if your ancestors had sunscreen or if they just lathered on crocodile dung. Immediately, the landscape strikes you as wrong. The sky is too blue, and the flora looks like something out of a fever dream. Gum trees with peeling bark wattles bursting in dusty yellow bloom, and strange spiky shrubs that remind you of Brussels sprouts on steroids. A fringe tidbit floats at the back of your mind. Some early settlers believed that the local kangaroos were nocturnal spies sent by French explorers, hopping around their loincloths at night to gather intel. Historians still argue whether that was genuine paranoia or just colonial cover for leftover baguette anxiety. Either way, you eye the kangaroos warily, half expecting them to report you for being a convict. The camp itself is a jumble of canvas tents, wooden lean-tos, and half-constructed huts. Sawdust from hastily hewn beams curls around the mud floors like cotton candy, except it's infested with ants that march in deathly swarms toward every scrap of bread you carry. You take a deep breath, the air tinged with sweat tobacco smoke, and the faint stench of rotting fish food supplies already spoiled in blistering heat. A group of fellow convicts slump around a wooden table playing cards with worn timber chips and tossing back tepid water from a wooden bucket. You notice one fellow wince as he picks at a festering blister sunburn. Meets infection, a delightful combo that no one ordered. You think, at least there's no Airbnb cleaning fee here. As you squint into the distance, you glimpse Aboriginal men watching from a safe distance, wrapped in kangaroo skin cloaks, carrying spears tipped with sharpened stone. Their eyes measure you with both curiosity and disapproval, like they've just been asked to babysit a gang of spoiled toddlers armed with muskets. A mainstream detail, local Eora people led by Bennelong and Barangaroo encountered the first fleet without initial hostility, but tension simmered like tea on a boiling pot. You wonder if a simple thanks for the land mate might have eased relations. But colonization rarely runs on kindness. You trudge past a lean-to where makeshift stretchers hold men laid low by dysentery. Their hollow cheeks and glassy eyes remind you of tax audits, in stark relief, completely soul-draining. A quirky anecdote: one convict reportedly tried to cure dysentery by eating raw cockatoo eggs, believing the birds' cries summoned healing spirits. Whether that truly worked or unleashed cockatoo-related gas pains is lost to dusty archives. Historians still debate whether such native remedies offer genuine relief or just compounded misery. You pass by, resisting the urge to ask if you can borrow a feather for your own nightmares. Your feet sink into the sandy soil, and you wince as you spot caked blood around an anointed post, perhaps, from someone's makeshift crucifixion of survival hopes. A closer look reveals crude carvings, J. Smith, 1788, etched by hand through sweat and despair. Those initials stare back at you like a silent warning your name could be next. You shuffle past heart-thudding, recalling Section 1's rat-infested hell vessel. Now rats here scuttle in the camp's fringes, competing with mosquitoes for your attention. You tug on your collar, wondering if someone packed DEET. In this century. Farther along, a lieutenant in a blue sash throws scraps to a scrawny pig that rummages through the refuse. The officer's linen coat is pristine, an oasis of white in a sea of disarray, while your ragged tunic feels like a costume from a cheap horror flick. He eye-roll lies at you, muttering something about needing more hands to unload supplies from a supply ship rumored to dock next week, if it's lucky. You think supplies I'd settle for a pallet of ice and a few popsicles. But hopes rise and fall faster than the tides, and the nearest ice box is 4 months away on a whaling vessel. You hear hammers splintering wood as a small cadre of convict laborers attempt to construct better shelters. The sound is a grim cacophony. Pine meets iron meets blistered knuckles. One man in a teal headscarf brandishes a battered hammer, cursing under his breath. "If I wanted carpentry, I'd have stayed in Birmingham," he grumbles, sweat streaking his dusty face. His fellow laborer, nursing a bleeding hand, replies, "Hold it together, mate. They'll hang you if you drop a single nail." You nod sympathetically. Nothing says welcome to survival like threats of hanging for slow work. A mainstream note, convict labor, was the backbone of early settlement, constructing the first crude roads and buildings under harsh conditions, a practice that fueled colonial expansion. Historians still argue whether this forced labor built a foundation for Australia's prosperity or merely served as an exploitative apprenticeship in brutality. Sun blazes down, and you shuffle toward a trough where water drips from a wooden sluice, stagnant, brownish, and best avoided. A fringe rumor claims that some convicts dipped cloth into the moat at Botany Bay to conceal their rank among peers. Freshness of water trumps fear of disease. Some even swore a mixture of eucalyptus leaves and river water warded off sickness. Whether those concoctions neutralized pathogens or just made people smell like gum trees is murky. Historians still dispute if Aboriginal knowledge contributed to such folk remedies, or if colonists co-opted them after a few bruised heads. As you bend to scoop up water, you gaze at the horizon, an endless stretch of rusty sand dunes that feel like crystallized flames. Your mind drifts to Section 1's 3-month ordeal at sea. Now a new trial begins in this scorching desert. You lift a trembling hand to shield your eyes, glimpsing the outline of a ship's mast far out to sea, perhaps carrying supplies, perhaps carrying fresh torment. You wish for a lifeboat, but you're firmly on land. You join a convoy of women in russet shawls, bent over weaving baskets from palm fronds, and attempt to mimic the local craft. Their faces are pinched with sunburn as they compete to produce the most sturdy container. "These will hold beetles faster than we hold bread," one mutters, slapping the partially woven fronds. Another brags she once sold a basket to a sailor for a crust of bread, an extravagant Hail Mary that nets mercy and rats. You smirk. Contemporary entrepreneurs would call her resilient. But here, it's just desperate times. A distant boom rumbles as cannons fire a salute to the governor's arrival, an empty gesture meant to display authority over this dusty expanse. You realize that the sound travels unevenly across the bay, sounding closer than it is echoing off limestone cliffs like heralds of doom. You cover your ears, half expecting the ground to crack open. The salute is meant to instill loyalty and obedience, as colonial pamphlets proclaimed, but you find yourself muttering, if only they gave out loyalty badges instead of noise. Later, as dusk softly bleeds purple across the sky, you trudge back to a half-finished hut, where rickety logs form the skeleton of a future home. A few convicts huddle around a lantern attempting to bake cornbread in a makeshift clay oven. The aroma is half-burned, half-sustenance. You can almost taste the soot. A woman in a tattered teal frock stifles a giggle as she slaps cursed lumps of dough. If I wanted charcoal biscuits, I'd roast squirrels next door. You share the laugh, but inside you wonder if laughter itself is another currency to stave off madness. You settle into a hollow log, using a piece of tattered cloth as a pillow. Night's cool air offers a brief reprieve from the day's flame, but the sky remains unmoved, stars like pinpricks taunting your insignificance. In the distance, Aboriginal figures walk along the coastline, silhouetted against phosphorescent waves. You imagine they see your colonial silhouette and wonder who cast whom out, the invader or the outlawed. As you drift toward a fitful doze, you feel the earth shift beneath you, a reminder that Botany Bay's sands are as unstable as your future. A breeze carries the brine of the sea and the rough scent of eucalyptus mixing into the quiet lullaby of crashing waves. You clutch a scrap of half-rotten blanket, closing your eyes against the memory of rattling chains and the promise of tomorrow's labor. A stray thought whispers, if I can survive this, I can survive anything except maybe kangaroo dung sunscreen. That thought fades as sleep claims you the dunes, rocking you softly toward nightmares and perhaps a dawn that doesn't taste of fire. You trudge into your makeshift hut, the canvas roof sagging under the weight of last night's desperate rain, and realize that home sweet home is the last sarcastic phrase you'll ever utter. Inside, the lull of wind through tattered fabric feels more like a warning siren. This shelter won't protect you from fleas, let alone the elements. A mainstream historical fact. Early penal settlements at Port Jackson relied on quickly erected tents and crude wooden huts with timber, often scavenged from beach driftwood or dismantled hulks. Official houses for soldiers and officials came only after months of hard labor. In other words, you're living in a carpenter's nightmare on fast forward. You crawl onto a plank roped between two leaning posts, the bed a thin layer of straw that squeaks louder than a defeated mouse. Every time you shift, splinters bite into your ribs. Nearby, damp blankets lie in a heap like soggy laundry in an ill-fated quilt factory. You grab a corner to cover yourself, but the cloth is more whole than cloth, gaping like a toadstool in a swamp. You pin it at your waist, hoping to keep the chill off, though the temperature hovers like a tease cool at dawn, swampy by midday and dead cold come evening. Outside, the wind picks up and rain pelt stabs the ground, turning clay into sticky mud that clings to your sandals. Slip and slide nights are not optional in this settlement. A fringe tidbit: some convicts tried to waterproof their tents by smearing animal fat and ashes over the canvas, creating a noxious-smelling paste that attracted every hungry rat for miles. Historians still argue whether those makeshift grease seals actually repelled water or just invited rodent hordes. Either way, your nose is hostage to a rancid stew of campfire smoke and burning hair. As you gingerly extricate a splinter from your knee, you remember Section 2's blistered feet trudging across sand and realize that sand here has turned to sticky clay that crawls into every crevice. You might consider elbow grease and prayer to dislodge it, but both options are as viable as digging for gold in a swamp. Your fellow tent mates groan as they stir, each wrestling with fever dreams or hunger pangs. You carefully stand bracing against a leaning post that groans like an old innkeeper complaining about unruly guests. Your stomach rumbles, reminding you that meager rations await if they haven't spoiled in the damp. Nearby, someone attempts to light a smattering of damp kindling, but it spits so much smoke your eyes sting. You cough, waving away the haze, and wonder if you're in a blacksmith's forge or a convict's purgatory. A man named Joyner, coughing up phlegm, pleads with the makeshift cook for a spoonful of salted beef. He's more desperate than a tax collector on payday. Instead, the cook ladles out watery vegetable broth, mostly boiled spinach leaves, pilfered from a fence line. You nibble a wilted leaf, wondering if it's spinach or some poisonous shrub that looks disturbingly similar. In colonial diaries, one convict actually bit a eucalyptus leaf, hoping to stave off scurvy, and ended up spitting it out with a yelp. You decide to stick to the spinach. Rising from your splintery plank, you bristle as wind gusts through a gap in the canvas, knocking a wooden bucket off its peg. It clatters against a stone, sending ripples of anxiety through the camp. Someone curses in a thick Cockney accent, while a guard yells from the other side of the compound, reminding everyone that if you skulk around after curfew, you'll be cudgeled and chained. That promise is less comforting than a lullaby, but at least adds a dash of adrenaline to your morning. You step out in stiff-soled boots, feeling the slick mud clogging each tread. Across the clearing, a group of convicts is already at work hauling logs for a more permanent hut. You join the line, grasping a grimy wheelbarrow handle with numb fingers. Each log is wet and heavy, as though soaked in misery. You hoist one onto your shoulder, grunting like a prize ox, imagining your ancestors cheering, "Isn't this just glorious, spoiler?" They're not. A breeze whistles across the settlement, lifting banners of tattered cloth strung between leaning posts to designate boundaries, convict quarters officers' huts, and the official guardhouse. The banners flap like half-dead butterflies. A fringe rumor holds that once at dawn, a convict saw an officer's blue banner drift away with the wind, landing in a mud pit, interpreted by some as a bad omen. Historians still argue whether such superstition fueled panic or merely provided a good campfire tale. You trudge to a long trough where water trickles from a bamboo pipe, muddy, infested with mosquito larvae, and likely loaded with giardia. You stare at the water like it's a frozen moat, teeming with invisible terrors. A fellow convict stands nearby with a broken wooden ladle, staring in abject horror. Given a choice between this or scurvy, I'd choose scurvy, he mutters. You can't disagree. Your stomach sinks as you recall Section 1's cramped ship holds. Now the claustrophobia is swapped for this sprawling misery. You hear a pickaxe clank against stone where someone in a teal headscarf digs a shallow latrine pit luxury of sorts. If only it weren't ankle-deep in sludge. A stray dog skulks nearby, thin as medieval catwalk, mottled, its fur matted. You wonder if it's a survivor or simply a sign that even animals vacated the city for better digs. Yet it's here, scavenging scraps like you, hoping for mercy. You notice a half-built hut with beams propped on rough stone footings. A blue-coated overseer barks orders as convict laborers hoist a mid-sized beam into place. You grin, thinking, looks like it'll be up just in time for the next plague. He eyes you admonishing, get moving, convict. You shuffle over, and he hands you a weathered chisel. You're expected to trim a tenon, looks easy enough, until you realize the chisel is duller than your wit. Each hammer strike bounces off the beam, pinging your knuckles like a school bell. You try again, grit your teeth, and chip away. A mainstream detail colonial carpenters often found nails in short supply, so they relied on hand-made wooden joints. You imagine those old-timers would weep at the sight of your wobbly tenon. Mid-morning sun beats down and sweat drips into your eyes, salt-water tears of regret. You pause to sip from a wooden flask containing sour milk, what used to be cheese, rind turned rancid. You gag imagining you shared lips with a dead goat. The slightest breeze does nothing to dispel the stench. You can't decide if you're surviving on purpose or by mistake. You wipe your brow on a ragged russet tunic and stumble toward a guard tower where 2 sentries in teal uniform lean on their muskets, smoking short pipes. One of them, a lanky fellow named Briggs, lifts a hand and says, "At least it's not snow, right?" You blink at him. There's no smiling in this place. His joke lands like a wet sponge. As midday approaches, a bell clangs, curfew reminder. No, it's the church bell, though the building is still under construction. They ring it anyway. Its tone is off-key, like a rusted plowshare scraping stone. You remember Section 5's scandalous leaks? Now think of an off-key bell wake-up call as a daily humiliation, rather than a communal alarm. You return to your chisel and beam sweat and splinters melding into a DIY exfoliation treatment. You chip another chunk of wood off the tenon, vaguely hopeful. A convict in saffron breeches passes by wheezing, "You're shaping history, mate. Just don't let history shape your spine." You laugh despite yourself. He might be on to something. Around you, the settlement hums with sorrow. Women hanging wet laundry streaked with mud. Children half naked and playing with brittle sticks, and a makeshift bakery where a few convicts coax a meager loaf from a cracked clay oven. You wander over to the oven, where a thin strip of charred bread cools on a wooden plank. A guard snatches it up, crooking an eyebrow at the baker. "If anyone else touches that, I'll hang you for theft," he snarls. The baker trembles, recoiling as though struck by lightning. A mainstream note, convict bakeries often operated under official orders, but shortages meant each loaf was as precious as gold. Historians still argue whether these baked offerings fostered community cohesion or deepened resentments, as every crumb counted. Your stomach grumbles, so you inch closer to the oven. The baker, a grizzled man in a teal head wrap, slides you a corner of that charred loaf hushed for old time's sake. You press the crumb to your tongue, tasting more soot than sustenance, but it fills an empty void. You catch a whiff of blackberry from a nearby bush, where children attempt to forage their faces smudged with purple juice from foraged berries, often the only dessert around. You step back, crunching the crumbs, feeling solidarity with the baker and shame for receiving charity from a stranger. In Section 2, you survived rats on a ship. Here, you survived baked bricks turned to charcoal. Each stage of this ordeal seems unyieldingly calibrated for misery. As afternoon wanes, you notice a line forming at a shallow pool where convicts wash off sweat and mud. The water is murky, untested, and possibly varnished with cloaca runoff. You debate douse yourself in questionable water or stew in sweat. You choose the former, leaning over the pool with trembling limbs, dunking your head. The sudden cold stuns you, but you relish it as a temporary resurrection. A sudden yelp. One of the women shrieks as she pulls a leech from her calf, its gray-brown body wriggling like a cursed snake. That's a fringe detail. Settlers believed leech therapy could draw bad blood, but also feared that leeches might carry bush demonic afflictions. Historians still argue whether leech therapy offered any real benefits or simply amplified settlers' paranoia about the local wildlife. You flick the leech into the mud, resolving to buy a pair of old shoes just to keep your feet above all this drama. By late afternoon, you've chipped enough wood to half finish that miserable tenon. You ask the overseer for a break. He offers you tepid water and a glare. Drink up, convict. We start again at dawn. You swallow. Then remember, you'd once fantasized about sipping margaritas on a beach somewhere warm and gentle. Now you'll take this filthy water as a sign the world hasn't completely given up on you. As dusk approaches, you drag your splintered bench back inside your hut, staggering as the plank catches on the muddy floor. You collapse into that pin-sized spot of straw that passed for a bed. Outside, a light drizzle begins sending condensation through the cracks, and you pull your threadbare blanket overhead. Lightning flickers to the south, which flickers you joke, ignoring the sudden pang of dread. Night settles in like a clandestine boss, and you huddle in your soggy hut. A distant howl, maybe a dingo, maybe a convict driven mad, sends a shiver down your spine. You remember Section 1's ship rats and Section 2's ghostly dunes. Here, every howl feels like an unwelcome reminder that civilization's thin veneer is peeling away. In the darkness, you whisper a crooked prayer, hoping tomorrow's dawn is less savage. Sleep arrives fitfully. You dream of eucalyptus-laden nightmares, scrubland chasing you with spears of barbed gum, until a sudden thunderclap yanks you awake. You glimpse morning light through a tear in your tent. You're alive, if slightly less intact. The makeshift settlement looms outside, a reminder that for now survival isn't about thriving. It's about negotiating each moment of discomfort with as little regret as possible. You rise, knees cracking, and steel yourself for another day of blistered feet, rotten rations, and rat-guarding guards. You step outside, each inhale tasting of acrid smoke, and unwashed bodies. Welcome back to the colony where every sunrise scans you for signs of weakness. You wonder if you'll end this day stronger or simply less delusional. Either way, dawn's cruel light awaits, and so do the wooden beams and mud huts that cradle your fragile existence. You shuffle to the edge of your plank, the dawn light filtering through the torn canvas like a sickly promise, and realize the real hardship here isn't the stink or the shackles, it's the constant gnaw at your belly that never quits. You probably won't survive this without considering how a single stale biscuit can feel like haute cuisine when you've been rationing scraps for days. In 1788, convicts at Port Jackson officially received daily rations of 1 pound of beef or 1 pound of pork, 1 pound of flour or 2 pounds of maize, and 1 pint of salted peas. But official often meant what was supposed to be rationed, not what you actually got. A mainstream historical fact, these rations, while meager, were often diluted by spoilage theft or spoilage, leaving many convicts sickly from undernourishment. You grip your emaciated ribs wondering how anyone could build a colony on nothing more than rancid pork and soggy maize. You open the flap of your tent and blink at the first rays of sunlight cutting through a haze of smoke from the communal fire. A line of convicts, their faces as pale as off-white canvas, stumbles toward the makeshift mess area. Each holds a battered wooden bowl and a chipped spoon, same bowls that once held precious lime juice to stave off scurvy, but now hold congealed gruel more inedible than a tacksman's dinner. A fringe tidbit, some convicts believed that adding animal fat from ship's provisions to their porridge would make it taste like home, but in practice it mostly rendered the porridge slicker and more prone to rancidity. Historians still argue whether these fatty additives provided any real nutritional benefit or simply bred a new generation of weevils in every mess tin. You inch closer to the pot, swallowing hard, as the cook ladles out a watery mash of maize meal stirred with rancid beef drippings. The aroma is a sodden clue that last night's stew was still rife with maggot larvae. No wonder your fellow convicts licked the rim of the bowl before letting it pass their lips. You manage a small cup of gruel which slides down your throat with the force of molasses. A taste joke flits through your mind. If someone handed Gordon Ramsay this bowl, he'd consider it an insult to utensils. Then again, even Gordon Ramsay might trade his Michelin stars for just a spoonful of anything that isn't sludge when the hunger pangs strike as hard as a vice on your gut. Around you, the line moves like a funeral procession, each convict trying to appear less gaunt than they actually are. The man in saffron-stained breeches from Section 3 scoffs at your eager spoonful. You eat that, and you'll grow wings of butter. He mutters the irony lost on no one. You jostle past him to maximize your chances, heart thrumming like a drummer at a wake. This isn't just breakfast. It's a gamble of endurance. 1 spoon of gruel might be the difference between shaky feet and collapsing into that permanently damp straw you call a bed. The wind kicks up, whipping the ashes from damp logs into your eyes and nose. You splutter the fumes, echoing the stench of desperation. A blunt-heeled convict in indigo leggings stands beside you, lamenting that he caught sight of a rat in the gruel pot last night. Dinner had eyes, he quips. You force a snort of laughter, but choke on a mouthful of gruel instead. A mainstream note rats were endemic in early settlements, drawn by open food stores and littered refuse leading to widespread contamination and disease. You remember the stories of shipboard rats, but here on land those vermin might be the only creatures thriving on what passes for colony cuisine. You swallow the last spoonful, grimaces through the grit and half-rotten grains. A ripple of coughs breaks out like a chorus line of the damned each convict, polished by hunger into a near-skeletal silhouette. From a vantage point behind the cook's crude lean-to, you watch rummaging birds, black cockatoos, crows peck at spilled gruel. They flap away with bits of maize, a reminder that wildlife here is often healthier than you are. You think, if I could sneak out and become a crow, I'd at least get an unspoiled breakfast. But alas, your shackles won't allow a metamorphosis, and you'll never out-squawk the colony's howling hunger. You stagger away to a half-dug hole where convicts queue to fetch water from an open trench. That water has seen more boots, drool, and maggots than any biologically safe zone. You dip a wooden scoop and gulp the liquid tasting of mud and regret, yet you gulp it down because it quenches the ache you call thirst. A quirky detail, one man claimed that adding spoonfuls of pig's blood to water helped restore iron levels, but most other convicts suspected that practice only birthed nightmares involving porcine vampires. Historians still argue whether these early blood tonics offered real therapeutic effect or simply exacerbated fevers and moral panic. You lean against a rotting fence post eyes, scanning the horizon where scrubland meets muddy coastline. A cluster of kangaroos hops in the distance, mobbing around flowering shrubs, oblivious to convict misery. You consider chasing one down, but a glance at your sunken frame reminds you that the most you could muster is a half-hearted jog-good chance you'd face a flogging for trespassing in official territory. Instead, you rub your ribs, remembering that if you eat more, you risk dysentery. If you eat less, hunger hollows you into a ghost. It's a lose-lose buffet. In the communal shade of a battered gum tree, you catch sight of a convict in teal rags carving a wooden spoon from a splintered board. Every table setting was custom-made in this colony. You try eating gruel with a cracked spoon, he laments. By the time you get the gruel, your spoon's sharp edges have bored a hole in your cheek. You wince at the thought, sharp edges, and stale gruel is a recipe for gratuitous pain. A mainstream observation early settlement records note that utensils were often traded for tobacco or sex, leaving poor souls scraping by with wooden stumps that offered more splinters than nourishment. You think of modern hypodermic needles here. Wooden splinters pack enough of a punch to count as a medieval inoculation. Nearby, a group of women convicts in russet shawls gather around a small fire pit, stirring a pot of watery pea soup. You peer over their shoulders. The peas are whole and uncooked, floating aimlessly in thin broth. You can't help but joke. It's like eating green pebbles in hot water gourmet bush style. One woman huffs as she stirs, replying, "At least it's not horse broth. Heard some convicts had to eat that last week." You swallow hard, shivering at the thought of boiled offal. A fringe tidbit, a lurid rumor circulated that some convicts tried to catch bush rats for stews, believing the small creatures were tastier than chickens. They were wrong. Historians still argue whether such desperate hunts saved lives or only hastened mental breakdown. Sunlight flickers across the muddy ground as a guard in a faded blue uniform strides up to their pot, pulling out a single spoonful of soup. He slurps it, nods approvingly, then tosses the spilled rest onto the ground, meant for the pigs. But those pigs have a stronger immune system than any convict. The guard smacks his lips, muttering, "Not bad for a bunch of criminals." Your jaw clenches. Criminals barely scratches the surface of your soul's chaos. You wonder if the guard's palate has ever known mustard or coffee, or if he's eternally cursed to the taste of rationed monotony. You back away, trudging across cracked earth toward a half-finished hut, where a solitary convict sits whittling a piece of driftwood. He glances up, eyes glazed. Made this spoon from a saddle splinter, used it once, thought it tasted like freedom. He snorts, tossing the spoon aside. Now it tastes like dirt. You offer a weak grin, recognizing a kindred spirit whose best spoon was as false a promise as any colonial manifesto. A sudden gust sends up a swirl of dust, making you choke. Your throat feels ragged raw from coughing up hot air and rancid fumes. You recall Section 3's night rain. Here, afternoons brew dust storms that steal moisture from every pore. You blink through grit, imagining coughing fits so violent they might make a convict sweat away a week's worth of rations in minutes. You retreat to a wooden crate, the only seat that isn't a plank or a log, and perch wearily. You watch as another convict tries to catch rainwater in a funnel made of bark, small hope, bigger dream. He tips his head back, mouth gaping, praying for drops that'll never come. You wonder if he's noticed that collecting your urine and waiting for dew to condense is a viable, albeit disgusting, alternative. But some lines you won't cross right. The convict ladles a grayish slop of pea soup into his bowl, and you notice his knuckles are as white as the canvas of your tent, thin skin stretched over bone. Yet he lifts that bowl like it's liquid gold, holding it to his lips with reverence. He swallows, savoring each inch of slurry as though it's the last sip of a fine brandy. You nod the corner of your mouth, quivering. I see your brandy and raise you rancid pork rind. Afternoon deepens. Shadows lengthen like gaunt fingers reaching for you. Hunger gnaws at your core, familiar, but no less furious. You rise, pacing in tight circles. The bones in your feet click against the hardened clay, a fragile rattling that mirrors your ravenous belly. You realize hunger isn't just aching joints or hollowed cheeks. It's a living spirit crawling inside you, whispering curses, betting you'll break first. A guard tiptoes by, tossing a scrap of stale biscuit at you as way of offering charity or a joke hard to tell. Savor it. He smirks, walking away with that Cheshire cat grin. You catch the brittle crumb, nibbling it like a true survivor, while part of you wants to fling it back and demand cooked kangaroo raw, iron-rich muscle that could actually fill your gut. By sheer force of will, you gather your resolve and trudge toward another group, where a convict in russet breeches teaches others to strip bark from eucalyptus branches to make a kind of tea, call it bush tea, if you will. The aroma is minty and bitter, a small miracle in a cup. He hands you a damp handful of leaves and instructs to steep them in boiled water. You fumble with his crude stones used for kindling a spark. No matches, no lighter, just the hope that friction sparks flame. As the leaves steep, you sweat profusely, hands sticky with resin and ash. You peer into the murky brew, hoping for a miracle. You lift a wooden ladle to your lips. Dust and bitterness swirl together as though the land itself is cursing your tongue. Yet you drink, and the bitterness coats your throat like resignation. You swallow hard, reassuring yourself that eucalyptus tea won't kill you unless you drink enough to hallucinate visions of the local bunyip lurking in muddy billabongs. Historians still argue whether bush teas offered genuine nutrients or just created new folk legends to scare children into obedience. You step away from the makeshift brew station feeling that slight warm tingle of eucalyptus tea coursing through your veins, enough to stave off scurvy, but not starvation. As the sun dips below the horizon, you spot the silhouette of a kangaroo hopping across a ridged tail, flicking as though taunting you. You raise your wooden cup in salute. May your grass always be greener than my porridge. Night falls. The camp's lanterns flicker, casting sallow light on convict faces. In the distance, a band of Aboriginal men sings a mournful chant across the dunes, a reminder that this land remembers far longer than any convict ledger. You settle back on your wet plank, the fumes of eucalyptus tea lingering like a ghost of relief. Hunger remains, but for a moment it's drowned out by the rising chorus of night's creatures, cicadas, droning whipbirds calling, and the steady thrum of your own heartbeat echoing through the damp hut. As you drift toward sleep, you taste grit gruel and the bitter bite of eucalyptus. You clutch your bowl and spoon, imagining it as a chalice of endurance. You promise yourself, if you can survive this day's famine, you might live to carve your own legend, one that doesn't end in a shallow pit or a mass grave. Yet for now, your reality is this: a night filled with hunger and haunted by the promise of rotten rations at dawn. You shuffle out of your leaky hut into the harsh glare of midday, the sky as merciless as an armory of judgment. Today's assignment: join the chain gang where convicts in rust-encrusted irons haul stone blocks across a makeshift road. You probably won't survive this without picturing your back snapping under a sun that seems to lecture you on mortal folly. A mainstream historical fact: by 1792, colonial authorities had established chain gangs to clear and level roads around Parramatta, driven by a belief that hard labor, especially breaking stone, would instill discipline and accelerate settlement. In reality, it more often bred exhaustion and shattered bones for men already hollowed by hunger. You step onto the dusty road path, a trench of rust-colored clay studded with sharp stones that glint like scattered teeth. The chain gang, about 24 convicts, forms a line stretching toward the horizon. Each of you wears irons that weigh between 10 and 15 pounds, linking leg to leg in a grim barbershop quartet of creaking metal. The irons clank as you shuffle forward, making your gait resemble a demented waltz. A fringe tidbit from the colony's fringe: some convicts claimed that if you whispered to your neighbor through the iron links, sharing secrets or jokes, the chains would rattle merrily in solidarity, as if the irons themselves had souls. Historians still argue whether such anecdotes were popular morale boosters or merely self-soothing delusions to drown out agony. As you advance, you see the overseer, a flinty-eyed soldier in a blue coat, wagging a bamboo cane like a human hype man. He's perched on a wooden crate beside a barrel of rancid water-spitting tobacco, as though it were sweet basil. He barks, "Forward! Use your strength or feel the lash." A convict ahead of you, wearing a russet headscarf to hide a weeping, sore grunts and stumbles boots, skidding on loose gravel. You catch a glimpse of his swollen ankle. He's a man who punishes himself daily for sins that seem far smaller than those inflicted upon him by this relentless sun. Your turn arranges you at the back of the line, each step an act of protest against gravity. A bead of sweat drips into your eye, stinging like a serpent's kiss. You wipe it away and squint at the pile of stones ahead, slabs of local sandstone roughly hewn and stacked like shape-shifting monoliths. The chore is simple: load one slab onto a wheeled cart, push it 50 feet, unload, and repeat until your limbs collapse. A quirky detail: some convicts fashioned wooden splints from discarded crate boards to prop their ankles, believing that makeshift braces reduced the agony of iron chafing. Whether these splints truly offered relief or just created new blisters remains a matter historians still argue, but tonight you'd cobble together any cure. You approach the stone pile posture, locked in a mask of grim focus. You grip the first slab, its edges jagged like the teeth of a jungle cat, and heave it onto the cart. The metal wheels groan as though protesting their lot in life, just like the convicts. You plant your feet against the packed earth and shove the cart inching forward as if beckoned by some unseen hand. Across the road, a group of officers sip weak tea under the shade of a lonely gum tree, comparing notes on which convict's back owes the colony the most sweat. A lieutenant in teal trousers dallies with his captain's daughter, a free settler by marriage, remarking on the commendable progress being made. You want to vomit on his fancy breeches. Your knees quake as you guide the cart over wheel-biting gravel, each bump reverberating through your spine. A convict ahead trips on a buried rock, catapulting his slab into the dirt with a thud that echoes like a funeral drum. The overseer cracks his cane, and the convict staggers to his feet, face contorted, hauling the slab back onto the cart. No quarter-given lifespan runs out in private. He shouts, and you imagine private quarters of hell. You collide with fatigue as you unload, the slab sweat seeping into your brows. You bend to catch your breath, lungs filled with dust and regret. The sun's rays burn your neck, each ray a spoked wheel of cruelty. You wrap a blood-soaked rag around your wrist to staunch a cut from yesterday's baptistry of stones. It remains a testament to the day you misjudged grip, thinking you had iron-clad strength, only to taste metal-tinged pain. As you slump to lift another slab, you notice a pair of indigenous trackers perched on a nearby rock outcrop. Silent observers wrapped in kangaroo skin cloaks. Their presence feels charged, as though they're watching a ridiculous pantomime. One of them, with ebony eyes, steps down and approaches the overseer, gesturing at the task. You strain to catch any word, but the overseer waves him off, dismissing their protests. In the early 1790s, Eora people often petitioned settlers to stop using certain sacred sites for encampments and labor creating a clash of priorities. Historians still argue whether these interventions delayed colonial projects or merely served as early examples of unintended cultural preservation. You secure another slab and wrestle it onto the cart, each fiber in your arms, screaming for mercy. A faint cough rumbles through the line, a convict named Blackstone coughing up blood from a chest infection. He leans against you, trembling. You offer to cover his share, but he hisses, "Not your burden." His pride, solid as any stone, breaks your heart. He staggers forward, downplaying his illness, determined not to appear weak. The overseer, noticing Blackstone's faltering step, approaches. He bellows, "Keep moving or face the yardarm." At least yardarm punishment means the dog paddle in darker waters, but you suspect he's bluffing. In the silence, you remember Section 3's roving horrors, rats, snakes, and bush demons, yet find that oppressive authority, not wildlife, poses your most immediate threat. You stomp forward, the cart's wheels dancing over molten earth. You pass a deep trench where another chain of convicts stacks rocks to patch up future well half-buried rocks that look ominously like tombstones. One convict stumbles, dislodging a stone that rolls and lands on his foot. He yelps, sending pain ripping through his face. The overseer flicks his cane, and the convict resumes work. Not even pain is allowed a reprieve here. At midday, the sun reaches zenith, dissolving shading illusions. You feel sweat trickle between your shoulder blades as though carrying tiny messages to the mayor. Your chafed skin stings with each spasm of labor. A fellow in russet breeches taps out a Morse code of misery with his forehead on the cart handle, hissing through clenched teeth. "I'd rather dance with 1,000 cobras than haul another rock." By afternoon, the line has dwindled. Convicts drop like skittles. Some collapsed from exhaustion. Others escorted to the infirmary, a wooden hut lined with straw-stuffed mattresses and half-cured fever patients. The surgeon's tools, rusted scalpels, and vinegar-soaked rags wait for the next wave of mangled limbs. You wish you could join them, but then you'd miss the chance to collapse into sleep you wouldn't remember. Suddenly, a gust rips through, raising whirlwinds of dust that obscure the horizon. You shield your eyes with one hand, stepping back to avoid a sand-blasted face. In that haze, you glimpse a line of kangaroos fleeing, a fleeting reminder that wildlife here has little patience for convict choreography. You envy them for their freedom, bound only by instinct and dawn's green light, not by irons and orders. Only 8 convicts remain in the line, including you. With a Herculean effort, you load the last slab and push. The cart creaks as though begging for a break. You steady its wheels in the groove of the earthen path, lean back, and give one final shove. You stagger backward, limbs wobbling like newly grown saplings. As you collapse against the cart, the overseer saunters over, clapping once mocking applause for a performance you never auditioned for. He nods at you, satisfied you survived. You nod back, but inside you're screaming for ice food and mercy, each a forbidden indulgence in this colonial purgatory. Exhausted, you drop to the ground and stare at the sky, blistering blue, promising no respite. You hear the overseer barking for fresh convicts to replace the ones carried off to the infirmary, but you remain lying on dirt, clutching the scent of sweat and despair. The irons on your legs creak as you stretch them out. testing each joint's willingness to cooperate. You recall Section 4's meager meals. Tomorrow's stomach ache is already a whisper in your gut. A plane of cicadas hums overhead, a stark soundtrack to your misery. You wonder if it's the insect's way of reminding you that life exists beyond your torment. Perhaps their incessant drone could be a lullaby, if only you weren't bound by iron and dread. You think, if I could whisper a secret to those cicadas, I'd beg them to swarm the overseer. When night descends, you'll haul yourself toward the convict barracks rows of half-finished wooden frames waiting to become homes. You huddle under a flimsy blanket with 3 others each, too exhausted to speak. In the quiet, you hear distant crackling bushfires, sparked accidentally by careless soldiers, or maybe aboriginal warning fires to push back settlers. Either way, the horizon glows with flickers of orange, a reminder that the colony's true fury may be more deadly than any stone or lash. As you drift on the ragged edges of consciousness, you clutch your chest, remembering a faint lullaby. Your mother sang decades ago, lyrics long since faded, but melody still etched in your bones. You wonder if she ever dreamt of you standing on alien soil, trading wooden shackles for iron ones. Sleep arrives as a half-delivered thought. If only you could dig your soul free from this ground. You awaken to the sound of boots stomping on rotten planks. Dawn is approaching, and the chain gang will be back. You remain on your back, staring at slats cracking overhead, until the first rays of sun stab through gaps. Hunger claws at your belly once more, iron hunger that no gruel or ration can quell. You peel back your blanket, heft yourself to your feet, and steel yourself for another day of hauling stones under a sun that doesn't care if you live or die. Yet somewhere, in that act of rising, of choosing to survive, you feel a spark, small but stubborn, like embers in a dying hearth. Perhaps, just perhaps, you'll haul enough stones to build more than roads. Maybe in this savage land, you'll rebuild something in yourself too. Though God knows the colony's odds stack higher than a sandstone wall, you trudge through the midday heat toward a field of cracked earth where a half-built stockade looms like a wooden maw waiting to swallow your hope. Today's task, chop down trees and split logs for the colony's defenses, because nothing says welcome like a skeletal wooden fence in the middle of nowhere. A mainstream historical fact by 1792. Governor Phillip had ordered the construction of a stockade around Parramatta to deter local Aboriginal raids, believing that a high wooden fence would keep both convicts and settlers safe from perceived threats. In practice, the stockade's timbers were so green they warped in the sun and cracked like parched lips. You probably won't survive this without picturing your own sweat dribbling into your eyes as you swing a heavy axe. Stepping into the shade of eucalyptus survivors, you feel a slight relief until you notice gum leaves dripping a resinous sap that sticks to your skin like glue. You raise your axe, the steel gleaming dully in the sun, and take aim at a slender tree trunk. The first strike sends up a shower of splinters, each one a miniature missile. A fringed tidbit: some convicts believe that if you struck the same tree stump exactly 13 times a mischievous kugla, a local spirit would share secrets of hidden water sources. Historians still argue whether these stories were genuine Aboriginal lore transmitted under duress or mere convict folklore, meant to lighten the misery. Either way, you sweat bullets just trying to land 9 clean blows before passing out. You heft the axe again, recalling Section 5's chain gang horrors, hauling stone pails next to hacking wood for the stockade. Both felt like taming giants with a toothpick. You grit your teeth and aim for a knot in the trunk, expecting a satisfying crack. Instead, the wood snaps unpredictably, sending a spray of chips into your face. You blink through the shards, wishing for goggles, though here they'd be a luxury akin to a ruby-encrusted feather. Behind you, a convict in indigo breeches yanks a sapling free from the ground, twirling it like a dance partner before tossing it into a growing pile. He breathes out, barely enough meat on this twig to feed a starving crow. He cracks a wry grin, and you can't suppress a chuckle. His brand of gallows humor feels like a salve on burning flesh. A mainstream detailed colonial timber for stockade walls was scarce, so convicts harvested spontaneously from nearby woods, sparking disputes over which trees were chrome property versus common convict loot. Historians still debate whether these ad hoc wood raids undermined colonial plans or simply illustrated desperate improvisation. You wedge the tip of your axe into a newly felled log chisel at the ready and begin splitting. Each wedge feels like you're trying to part the ocean impossible without relentless force. The log cracks, but not cleanly. Half the wood resists, forcing you to switch stances and hack with renewed fury. You think, if I wanted to build a fence this inefficiently, I'd hire a toddler with ADD. Instead, you swing again, channeling that toddler's single-minded determination. Nearby, a guard in a teal uniform paces cane in hand, humming a tune that sounds suspiciously like a nursery rhyme. He barks occasionally, "Watch your stance, convict," as though any crooked swing might topple the entire empire. You'd love to ask him if he's ever split a log in 100-degree heat, but you suspect his mother taught him not to squat in his pants. Instead, you hum along the tune's familiarity, offering a fleeting distraction from blistered palms. You crack open another log, sweat dripping onto the dusty ground. It scorches the dirt, rising as a heat wave that momentarily distorts the horizon. You catch a glimpse of a cluster of wildflowers, tiny yellow wattles along the fence line, as though nature itself were cheering you on. You pause to remember Section 3's bush berries. These, by contrast, are likely safe to chew, though you resist. You think, if I chew a wattle blossom, I might hallucinate that I'm building a cathedral instead of a cage. Across the clearing, Aboriginal trackers crouch, observing you with inscrutable expressions. Their patient stance contrasts with your sweaty flailing. You wonder if they see the folly in felling trees to keep themselves out, rather than building bridges, both literal and metaphorical. A scholarly debate bubble pops into your mind. Historians still argue whether colonial fortifications genuinely provided security or merely symbolized the settlement's fear, sowing greater distrust. You swallow, feeling as if you're splitting not just logs, but the fragile détente between two worlds. You take a moment to rest, leaning your axe against a stump. Your shoulder aches like a dull thunderclap, and your legs wobble under you. You scout the partially built stockade, a row of upright logs driven into the earth, their tops jagged like broken teeth. It stands at knee height now, but you suspect it'll reach your chest before sundown. Each sapling you fell today becomes part of this fence, and every log split inches you closer to exhaustion. You recall Section 2's hungriest dawns. Splitting wood is a special kind of hunger where muscles cry out for food even as your belly roars for sustenance. You press a hand to your midriff and feel hollow echoes. A convict in saffron breeches shambles over, offering you a piece of dried kangaroo meat, chewy, gamey, and possibly harboring maggots. He shrugs. Better than nothing, mate. You consider it a luxury and take a bite, jaw aching as you chew, tasting grit and shadows of the desert's roamers. The guard whistles sharply, signaling that it's time to hoist logs into place. You hoist that same slab you split, hefting it with convict-level finesse. Fellow convicts chant 2, 3, up as you force the log upright into a post hole. You shove and pivot the wet sap, trickling down the sagging bark winding through your fingers like sticked dread. The log settles with a thud, and you wipe your brow, surveying the growing barrier. It looks like the skeleton of a colossal porcupine imbued with equal parts menace and vulnerability. As timber is stacked, dust motes hover like ghostly confessions in the sweltering air. You wipe sweat from your forehead, glimpsing your reflection in a small puddle of muddy water. Your face is streaked with filth eyes, dull from toil. You dimly recall Section 1's laundry nightmares. Now you give anything for even a mud bath sans hippo droppings. When the sun reaches its zenith, you gather under a half-shaded gum tree for a brief reprieve. You pant, chest heaving, while a dozen convicts sit slumped as if gods have taken their breath in a cosmic prank. Someone whispers about a convict who absconded overnight and hasn't been seen since likely swallowed by bush tigers or heat stroke. You shudder, recalling Section 4's hungry dawns, and Section 2's desert dunes escape into the wild might mean trading shackle for snakebite. Either way, your choice is a noose or a fang. You catch a guard's glance, his teal coat stark against bleached earth. He scratches his head textured with salt and pepper hair and tuts at your ragged state. Time's up, he announces, as though you'd just asked for a nap. Jabbing your aching leg with a silent, unspoken complaint, you rise dust off your breeches and grimly prepare for the afternoon's final slog. Back on the line, you chop a sapling into a sharpened stake, the pointed end glinting with menace. You imagine using it for more than the stockade catching crayfish in a muddy creek or making kangaroo stew. But for now, it sinks into the earth as part of the stockade's next section. With each stake you drive, you wonder if the fence will ever keep anything out, or simply corral you and your fellow convicts into an endless cage. The guard's bamboo cane hovers as you miss the mark, forcing you to straighten your aim. Your swing arcs high, more akin to a hockey stick than a felling axe, and you feel the stirrings of humiliation. You grit your teeth, channeling your inner outback lumberjack, and bring the axe down. The stake splits in half splinters, scattering like confession spilled onto stone. You swallow, hoping no one caught your bungled blow. As you pause to catch a breath, you notice a group of Aboriginal trackers silently approaching the fence line. They inspect the stakes, tapping each point with a knowing eye as though judging craftsmanship rather than threat. Their presence is a reminder that the woods you cut down once belonged to someone else, their land now repurposed into prison walls. You feel a twinge of guilt, perhaps a glitch in the convict code of survival, become jailer to your own soul. An officer clusters with a map of the colony's perimeter scribbled on parchment. He paces, muttering about expanding the stockade toward the creeks to keep convicts from escaping along water routes. You wonder if a better use of resources would be food and medicine, but you bite your tongue. Questioning authority never ends well here. By late afternoon, the line finishes the final section. The stockade stands a half-finished barricade of green logs, edge to edge. It leans precariously in places like a domino chain, misaligned, ready to collapse at the slightest nudge. You back away, running a hand along the rough bark, feeling its pulse. A sense of hollow triumph seizes you. You helped build it, yet you know it offers a false sense of security for both colonists and convicts. Historians still argue whether these early stockades truly shaped settlement or simply illustrated how impermanent colonial control could be. When nature refused to comply, your arms ache and your throat is raw from inhaling wood dust and desperation. You step over an uprooted stump and watch as the descending sun ignites the fence in fiery orange. In that light, the stockade looks less like a barrier and more like the ribs of some colossal beast dying in the sun. You remember Section 3's whisper of kangaroo spies. Now the fence is a silent sentinel, unsure whether it's keeping wild things out or entombing you in wilderness. As you stagger back to camp, your irons clanking with each step, you recall the simmering scholarly debate: does forced labor in colonial frontiers build character or crush humanity? Today's ordeal suggests the latter. You chew on that thought as you cross the clearing, blending into the chorus of groans and wheezes from fellow convicts, each of you shaped by toil into mirror images of exhaustion. You reach your leaky hut knees, buckling under the weight of fatigue. You drop your axe and slump onto the straw, inhaling the familiar scent of sweat and grain. In the faint twilight, you visualize tomorrow's sunrise, another chance to chop, split, and lug your way across this fractured land. The stockade's rough fence stands between you and so-called safety, a reminder that every cut you make in the wood is a cut against your own freedom. You close your eyes, the rhythmic sound of distant bush life lulling you toward a fitful rest. You're bone-weary, but alive, still tethered to hope like a convict's chain, each link forged from resilience. You whisper, "If I can chop wood under this sun, I can survive anything well except being hung for missing a nail." Sleep finally claims you, the stockade's sawtooth silhouette etched in your dreams, reminding you that even walls built with sweat and blood can't hold back the wild heart of the land. You slip your shackle key, someone whispered it, lingered under the mattress into your trembling palm, and creep toward the camp's paling with a heart beating like a bush Tommy goose calling at dusk. In this moment, you're no longer a convict hauling stones or chopping wood. You're a fugitive on borrowed time, a mainstream historical fact Between 1788 and 1810, roughly 3 out of 500 convicts escaped the main settlements, many attempting to vanish into the bushlands embracing the colony. Only stragglers and a handful ever returned. Most perished, swallowed by wilderness that neither cared for nor recognized the urgency of your plight. You probably won't survive this without picturing yourself exposed to cracking sun, invisible thirst, and predators that lurk in every rustle of leaves. You bend low, skirting the coarse outer fence, just as a guard silhouette drifts past the guardhouse lantern, pause, exhale, sprint through the gap. Your fellow convict pried open last night. The night air tastes of eucalyptus and fear, cool enough to chase away the sweat from your palms. Ahead, darkness crouches over grass clumps and gum trees, their twisted branches reaching like skeletal arms. A fringed tidbit, some convicts swore that if you passed by a ghost gum at midnight, the spirit of an escaped felon, grasping chains and translucent fists, would recite your sentence in staccato moans. Historians still argue whether such ghost gum legends were genuine Aboriginal Dreamtime lore mingled with convict desperation, or simply campfire stories spun to spike adrenaline. You slip deeper each step, muted by leaf litter and fine gravel pulling at your boots. The sky overhead is a wash of stars, brighter than any back home, as though the Southern Cross watches you like a cosmic sentinel. You remember Section 2's rotting ship decks where rats nibbled through wood. Here, the bush's silent denizens might be far more lethal. At any moment, you might stumble upon a diamond python coiled in the undergrowth. One bite delivers life-ending venom faster than a noose. You keep your torch low and narrow, a sliver of orange drifting across scrubland, hoping to spot any shifting shape that might wind around your ankles like a living rope. Your throat parches instantly, and you swear every swallow stretches your dry tongue into a cracked marsh. You recall that early settlers noted bush pilgrims perished from dehydration within days. Spring water was rare, and many water holes lay stagnant or infested with leeches. A mainstream detail water often hides in root systems, and some indigenous people knew to follow bandicoot tracks to hidden seeps. You hesitate. Do you dare follow those tracks, risking an encounter with venomous snakes, sunning themselves near tiny pools? You decide it's worth the gamble and angle your path to a dried creek bed where you once glimpsed bandicoot scuffs by day. You crouch by the creek's sandy bed and press your lips to a dead leaf, funneling scant droplets barely enough to dampen lips, but a lifeline nonetheless. You sip greedily, tasting grit more than moisture, and imagine your body is a deflated bag of feathers gasping for breath. A quirky detail, some convicts boiled and drank their own urine rather than face certain death by dehydration. Whether that repulsive measure actually conserved fluids or only hastened thirst remains debated, with some historians suggesting it was a last-ditch myth to be passed down as a warning rather than a practice. You press on, navigating by starlight and memory of the midday sun's arc. The bush demands respect. Angular shadows morph into half-seen shapes, walls of bracken trunks scarred by termites, droplets of dew that glitter like scattered stars on leaves. You slip past a clump of ghost gums whose bark gleams pale as bone. You run a finger over the trunk, recalling those ghost felons' moans, yet no lament escapes the wood, now only the distant cry of a broga calling mates. The mournful call might be nature's lullaby, or a spoiler for your solitude. As dawn breaks, you crest a small ridge and glimpse the settlement's outline, smoke curling from bakehouse chimneys, the stockade's jagged tops, a spiked horizon. You've traveled miles, but still haven't outrun the colony's long arm. Deserted saplings line your path, each tree you felled. In Section 6 marked a yard closer to freedom. Yet now freedom tastes like fresh eucalyptus sap, sweet, sticky, and pulpy. You pause beneath a salmon gum, its trunk blushed with dawn's first light, and realize your boots are coated in clay that clings like leeches. You pry off one boot, exposing blistered foot, blackened from chain gang mud. The pain is sharp, urging you to weep, but tears evaporate in the sudden heat spike. A fringe rumor claimed that applying powdered termite mounds to wounds could staunch pain, the formic acid in the powder burning away infection. You have no powder, no medics. Your grimy palm pressed to a raw blister is your only remedy. Historians still debate whether termite dust cures or curses those wounds. You suspect curses. Time passes in desperate strides until the midday sun cracks the sky. You feel your shirt cling as though the bush is wrapping you in a suffocating embrace. You spot a waterhole ahead, its rim fringed by spinifex and brittle ferns. You lurk behind a bush watching ripples where a kangaroo dips to drink. You gulp in silent envy of its freedom. You cannot leap like that, cannot vanish under a snag, cannot outrun men on horseback who'll pick up your scent any minute. Deciding rats scurry over your dignity, you dash to the water, submerge your head, and gulp greedily. The water is scalding hot from sun-warmed rocks, but reprieve tastes like a frozen melody. Each swallow filters grit through chapped lips, but liquid or not, the heat is less punishing than the long shadows of day that warn the bush sharpens as the sun falls. You recognize a depression in rocky terrain that Aboriginal families used as a seasonal campsite. Cool winds drift through, and clay soil holds humidity. You trudge toward it, bones aching, lungs rasping. There you find remnants of a small fire circle, 4 stones charred at the edges, an offering pit from a family that likely fled before you were born. You scoop a handful of ash and inhale smoky earthy. It carries whispered stories of people whose feet left fewer marks on this land than convicts. You wonder, are you the one desecrating the sacred circle? Or have your fellow escapees sought temporary safety here before utterly disappearing? You collapse beside the fire pit, pressing your frayed back against a smooth boulder. Your eyes flutter shut as midday's last sliver of heat fades and a cool breeze rises, rustling gimlets and acacias. In the shade, you feel momentary peace, like being cradled by ancient land that tolerates your presence because, unlike the colony, it doesn't demand bribes or forced labor. But bliss is fleeting. A crack snaps through the silence, the unmistakable report of muskets. In seconds, fear rockets through you. You half crawl, half run toward a rocky outcrop, your only shield. Behind the crag, you press cheek to sandstone, panting as 6 mounted trackers approach. Their cloaks swirl in the wind, and they wear woven regalia, signifying their local warriors allied with colonial forces. A mainstream fact, colonial authorities often employed Aboriginal trackers to locate escapees, due to their unparalleled knowledge of the terrain. Many trackers volunteered to curry favor or secure food supplies for their families, willingly guiding colonists through land they once roamed freely. Historians still debate whether such alliances truly reflected mutual benefit or deep divisions forced upon indigenous communities. From your rocky hiding place, you see the trackers dismount, spears half slung and rifles raised. Their leader, a tall man with ochre-painted face, stands scanning the horizon for movement. You sink lower into the gap, heart hammering like a pressure drum. Fear floods your veins as you recall Section 1's arrival. Dances of smoke from a distant fire can become death sentences for unsuspecting escapees. A twig snaps underfoot. You freeze, air lodged in your throat like a trapped mouse. A tracker's eyes flick to your hiding spot. He takes a deliberate step forward, foot raising a cloud of dust. Your mind reels. Do you jump up, cry mercy, and surrender? Or do you gamble on a leap toward freedom? Every option is death, either at the muzzle of a rifle or through exposure in these wilds. You gather your last ounce of courage and hurl yourself along the rock's shadowed edge. The leader lifts his rifle and fires. A whistling crack splits the sky as the bullet slams into the boulder inches from your head. You flinch at the thump of rock shards chipping off under percussion. You bolt across the clearing, disappearing behind a thicket of spinifex. A second rifle shot rings off your ankles, balancing the cost of escape in bark and bone. You sprint blindly as thorns scrape your arms each scratch. Riding outrun the law across your flesh. You feel the tracker's bare feet slithering through grass behind you, fleet as dingoes. You vow, I won't be caught today, even as oxygen clouds your brain. You twist around and launch a fist of small stones. One grazes the tracker's shoulder. He swears in a language you don't understand and sprints forward, ignoring injury. Your final desperate gamble, a steep bank leading to a river bend. You fling yourself down, tumbling through loose gravel, arms and legs flailing. You skid into murky water, cold, stinging, and merciful. You feel the current tug at your boots like a mother pulling her child from drowning. You allow the river to carry you a few strokes downstream, then scramble onto a muddy bank. Branches scrape your face, and you gulp air with shuddering lungs. Behind you, the tracker emerges at the river's edge, rifle glinting. He raises his arms in a gesture you interpret as both surrender and caution. He can't swim you down, but he's eyeing you like prey. Your mind whirls. You could attempt to swim across, got to reach the other bank, could be freedom, could be crocodile infested, but the thought of saltwater crocs snapping jaws in twilight coastal flats makes you freeze. A scholarly debate echoes in your mind. Historians still argue whether many escapees deliberately waded across rivers to reach supposed safe havens only to meet crocodiles or drown. Some believed that wild dogs or dingoes posed as great a threat as waterborne reptiles. You turn to face the tracker, coughing up river silt, right hand raised in a shaky sign of surrender. Your voice cracks. Please, Mangana, no gun. He steps forward, rifle lowered. You taste relief barely before the biting cold of the water seeps into every bone, demanding you move. You hoist yourself onto a soggy trunk and limp along the bank as the tracker guides you back to settlement, regret heavy in your chest. At the stockade's gate, you're shackled once more, this time your legs and wrists in locks so tight they bite into flesh. A guard smirks. Thought you'd join the bush spirits. Not tonight. You offer a wry nod. The tracker rides off, body silhouetted against the rising moon, disappearing into streaks of ghostly starlight. You're hauled back among sleeping tents, where convicts startle awake at your return, eyes wide in disbelief. You slump back into your damp hut, waiting for the collarbone ache to pass. The bush has spat you out alive, but broken, another ghost returned to feeble flesh. You peel your ribs from the damp straw, thinking, next time, maybe just build my own house. You close your eyes, the pounding of your pulse, weaving lullaby rhythms, thump, 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 echoing that moment when life hinged on a shot narrowly missing your head. As you drift off, mind hazy with exhaustion, you sense that the bush hasn't lost its teeth nor its stories. In those dreams, you're wading through a river of stars, the tracker's silhouette fading behind water spray, and moonlight reminding you that freedom is as elusive as the Southern Cross's reflection in a dark lagoon. You wake from a restless dawn slumber spine, still aching from the iron yoke, and realize today's ordeal replaces the punishing sun with darker torments, the lash and the dungeon. You probably won't survive this without picturing your own shoulders reddened into raw meat by 100 blows of a kangaroo hide whip. A mainstream historical fact, corporal punishment in the Australian Penal Colony was a regular sanction by 1803. Governor King authorized up to 50 lashes for breaches such as disobedience or attempted escape with double iron, pitching some men into solitary confinement for months on end. You crumple to your feet, mind flickering back to Section 7's escape attempt and the tracker's bullet whistling past your head today. Your punishment for that half-baked rebellion looms larger than any bush specter. You stagger out into the courtyard where a half-dozen convict turnkeys stand by their faces as blank as bleached sheep skulls. The morning sky slants thin rays across a row of iron rings embedded in a stout gum tree's trunk, your appointed whipping post. You shudder, recalling how the overseer's bamboo cane cracked like a giant's knuckle last time, and each snap drove bloodlust into the guards. A fringed tidbit, some convicts believed that if you tied a rag soaked in native eucalyptus oil over your wounds, immediately after flogging, the burning resin would ward off nightmares of bunyip demons visiting wounded flesh at night. Historians still argue whether such botanical balms functioned as genuine antiseptics or merely fueled mythic comfort among broken men. You shuffle irons clinking toward that notorious gum. A chorus of curses echoes in your head, mocking your courageous dash for freedom, now repaid with punishment. The lead turnkey unravels a coil of rope, knotting it into a makeshift halter around your wrists. You hear the taut snap of hemp, too late arching backward as the turnkey drags you to the post. The bark's surface presses into your bare stomach, a crude reminder that this tree, once a silent witness to Aboriginal ceremonies, now laces its trunk with convict suffering. You press forward, heart hammering. As the guard insists, you remain motionless. Beside you, the turnkey croons a mocking lullaby, his words half-forgotten tunes from youth. Steady now, he purrs, adjusting your thighs so the flogger has broad access. You bury your face in the coarse bark, hearing the distant caw of a raven, a bird convicts said carried the souls of those flogged to the underworld. A mainstream note flogging left more than physical scars. Chronic pain and infection often condemned men to lingering ruin. Still, some hardened convicts claim that surviving 100 lashes marked you as a man among men, a badge of stoic endurance. Historians still argue whether flogging truly deterred crime or simply brutalized prisoners into false compliance. You squeeze your eyes shut as the guard unsheathes the whip, kangaroo hide strands braided into a razor-edged thong. You taste dust, greet its dryness like a poisonous kiss, then steel yourself. The first lash splits the skin along your back, and hot agony travels like a dagger through your soul. You gasp, forcing breath in measured beats as the lashes fall in a staccato that echoes like a death knell. Each strike sears, sending sparks of white fire under your skin. A convict tattoo artist once told you that tattoos of crucifixes or Mother Mary could shield the spirit from dread, another fringe belief historians still debate as mere folklore or actual practice. Tonight, you'll see if divine ink softens the nerve-piercing sting. As the second lash falls, you spit curses at the guard's boots. May your beard fall out and your bread go stale, but the guard is unmoved, whirling the whip for another arc. You hunch a primal reflex, but the guard loosens his grip on your wrists, banishing any hope of protection. The whip's tail digs deeper, peeling skin like overripe fruit. You stagger, mind dimming at the edges, reciting in your head borrowed psalms from memory tuus petrus, as if clinging to any scrap of faith might ward off the last lash. Somewhere in the haze, you notice a convict shackled to the same post across from you, his back a tapestry of scars from past lashes, each red stripe a cruel medal. He tilts his head, whispering "Good day, mate," in ragged humor, as though you and he share some perverse fraternity. You want to hiss that this is no joke, but breath is scarce. The guard pauses, counting done, and you sag against the post, weightless shame, flooding through bleeding flesh. You taste copper on your tongue, blood mixing with sweat in one bitter sip. You hear clamor as another convict is dragged forward for a separate offense, a stolen ration of maize meal. His face is a mask of defiance. You imagine he'll either scream or pass out within 3 lashes. The guard cracks the whip, and for the second event of the morning, flesh splits. You clench your teeth, focusing on a slice of eucalyptus twig sticking from your bound fingers, discovering that chewing the leaves momentarily distracts you from the pain. The eucalyptus oil stings your gums, but each pang is a tether pulling you back to existence. When your turn for the tender mercy of the lash ends, you stagger away, arms shaking like saplings in a gale. You press a hand to the worst wound. The red gash throbs like a drum. As you limp toward the governor's small infirmary, a lean-to with a bed of fresh kangaroo skins, you grit your teeth at the thought of any crude salve. Instead, the surgeon's assistant slathers a mixture of animal fat and crushed snail shells into each slit, topping it with a rag to stem the bleeding. A quirky detail, some convicts found that scraped snail shells contained slight amounts of lime, believed to draw out foul humors. Historians still argue whether such snail-shell poultices truly aided healing or introduced infection through filthy shells. In the infirmary's dim light, the surgeon peers at your wounds through spectacles so thick they magnify his eyes to owl-like proportions. He mutters a clinical examination as he gingerly probes the cuts, searching for debris. His quill scratches across parchment flicking notes. Convict X excessive flogging recommend emollient. You wonder if his emollient is nothing more than diluted molasses or expired butter. In these parts, medical supplies were as rare as clean linen. The surgeon's assistant holds a bowl of cooled river water, and he bids you wash if you wish. You dip a trembling hand into the water and rinse the wound, tasting a hint of algae. Cold water sends a jolt through your nerves, reminding you that life persists in the simplest forms. As the surgeon finishes, he says quietly, "Try not to off yourself before dusk." His grim humor stings more than the whip. A convict strapped to a nearby sling groans, and you glimpse his hollow cheeks, malnutrition sealed in bone. You steel yourself, willing your breath to steady, fearful that a cough could open your wounds anew. Pain is a constant companion, cyclical, like the sun rising and setting with no promise of relief. Once patched, you're escorted back to the chain gang lines. Further work awaits, though you can barely stand upright. The guard remarks, "Try not to slow us down, or it'll be another 50 lashes." You nod silently, lips pressed tight. Each step jolts your wounded back, threatening to dump you face first into the dirt. You prop yourself against a log pile, lowering your body as though performing a slow descent into the abyss. Around you, convicts toss wet logs into a cart bound for the stockade project. A dismal wrecking ball flinging new walls out of fallen trees. Some convicts sing a rough, bouncing melody to ease the labor-heady discordant notes that anchor them to purpose haul the timber, haul it straight, or be flogged to meet your fate. The tune threads humor into misery, reminding you of drunken shanties aboard prison hulks. You hum along each note, a shaky anchor to fleeting camaraderie. Even in suffering, a shared refrain can still birth a grin. Toward noon, the overseer dismisses the afternoon's toils. You release a breath that's been wedged in your chest since dawn. You stagger toward the tents, each step forcing the scars on your back to cringe. Shadows shift as the sun rolls overhead, speaking of the day's middle when hunger, thirst, and fatigue become indistinguishable. You clutch your side-tasting bile as you glimpse your reflection in a cracked tin plate face, gaunt eyes, rimmed a living testament to colonial cruelty. As you lean against the edge of a weather-battered tent, a convict doctor somehow bestowed that ironic title kneels before you, offering a piece of damper bread soaked in soured milk. You chew slowly each gritty bite, feeding both salvation and scurvy. He whispers that women convict sometimes boiled kangaroo fat with osmanthus flowers to create a healing balm. You taste rose-like bitterness in your mouth, imagining petals being spun into comfort. Historians still argue whether such concoctions genuinely addressed wounds or simply masked the stench of rot. Shadows lengthen as late afternoon approaches. You realize you've spent hours marching between whip post, infirmary, and labor lines, each path a ritual of submission and endurance. You think, if I survive another day, I'll pen my own sermons on the gospel of hardship. Yet with each breath, you wonder if tomorrow's lash will strip more than skin, perhaps even your will to keep living. Night falls, and you lie on your kangaroo skin pallet edges, curling like damp paper. The deep silver of moonlight washes over your battered form. Opposite the convict doctor sits by a small lantern, his silhouette tracing numb circles on the earth as he scribbles observations. Poor nutrition, overwork, possible infection. You wish for a single wonder flower to bloom at his feet, offering hope, though he tells you those flowers only emerge in half-forgotten bush chapels. You shift to glimpse the gum tree where you were lashed shadows, painting it like a sorrowful mural. In that darkness, you feel the daggers of pain recede momentarily, replaced by a quiet bow. If even one star remains unvanquished above this brutal plain, so too might you endure. The convict next to you groans in sleep, caught in nightmares of converging stripes of red on his bare back. You press your fingers into your own scars, feeling the ridges that map each harsh mark. Just before sleep claims you fully, you murmur a desperate plea, not for absolution, but for mercy, either from God, man, or fate. Somewhere in the crackling embers of your being, a spark lingers, a stubborn promise that despite every lash, every scorching day, you remain unbroken. You stumble into the colony's rudimentary hospital hut, each step weighted by aches and the creeping dread that your injuries might be less deadly than the invisible pathogens roaming free. The wooden walls sag inward as though bearing the collective guilt of neglect, and the stench of stale bandages hits you like a slap. Tonight, you're here to witness the toll of disease and medical neglect, the silent executioners graver than any lash or stockade. You probably won't survive this without picturing yourself curled on a straw-filled pallet, bones rattling with fever, while maggots feast on festering flesh. In colonial Australia's early years, medical resources were scarce. A mainstream historical fact notes that by 1800, Sydney Hospital, established in 1788, had only one surgeon for hundreds of convicts and settlers, often relying on makeshift remedies and half-trained assistants. You push open the rough-hewn door, which creaks mournfully, and find 3 convicts lying on cots, lashed together with fraying rope. One coughs so violently his head snaps back, spitting blood that stains the straw bed like a crimson graffiti. A fringe tidbit: some convicts believed that chewing eucalyptus leaves could stave off consumption tuberculosis in modern parlance, though inhaling vapors might have done little more than numb the throat. Historians still argue whether these folk remedies offered any true curative value or simply spread false hope among the desperate. You step past a table stacked with tarnished instruments, rusted lancets, bone-handled amputation saws, and oily jars of dubious tinctures, each item a relic of fleeting hope. The sole surgeon, Dr. Barrow, a gaunt man in a threadbare dark coat, stands hunched over a patient. He squints at a blackened ulcer on the man's leg, noting in his journal with an ominous flourish, "Gangrene advanced." You watch his trembling hands prepare a poultice of crushed snail shells and animal fat, convinced this compound might draw out infection. Whether it truly worked or merely warmed the flesh before decay remained a point historians still argue, A convict scavenging water for the patient's whispers in your ear bet that poultice smells like a swamp's belly. You nod soberly, imagining a concoction so rancid it might repel both flies and hope. You creep closer to the coughing man who lifts his head to meet your gaze. His eyes are hollow slits, pupils glazed over. He mutters, I begged to see the surgeon earlier, but they said no room. You recall Section 8's flogging aftermath. Now you see how other punishments linger inside, festering like unattended wounds. You spot another patient, a young man in russet breeches, convulsing on his cot. His breathing rattles like broken reeds. Dr. Barrow mutters about rheumatic fever or typhoid, uncertain which culprit strikes first. Quirky detail rumors circulated that survivors of typhoid gained an immunity so robust they could drink stagnant pond water without instant consequence. Whether this was folk bravado or genuine immunological serendipity, historians still argue. You watch the convulsions subside, the young man's body goes limp, lips tinged blue, a reminder that absence of pain sometimes precedes the longest slumber. You turn toward a third cot, where a squat convict in indigo trousers lies sweating under a threadbare blanket. His delirious eyes rolling as he clutches his abdomen. His skin is pale as bleached bone veins standing out like dark tributaries. A faint groan escapes him, morphing into unintelligible pleas to go back to the barracks or find the sergeant. The sweep of his ragged breath tells you his fever is raging. Dr. Barrow dabs a cloth in cold water and presses it to the man's brow, then murmurs, "If we had quinine," but trails off, knowing shipments from India have been delayed, leaving malaria rampant. You step across the dirt floor wincing as a loose board echoes under your foot. A half-finished ledger lies on a barrel, dozens of names crossed out, verdicts like deceased from phthisis or expired before treatment scribbled beside them. You trace your finger to a fresh entry. Severus Hawkins typhus, died with no visitor. That final phrase hangs heavy, a silent lament for the lonely dead. How many convicts perished unseen each, a flicker snuffed out by neglect or despair. Your mind drifts back to Section 6's stockade labor. Perhaps, if you'd labored less and been fed more, you wouldn't be here sweating your life into tattered sheets. You feel a pang of guilt, akin to slow-burning embers survival in this colony, often meant sacrificing your fellow man's well-being for the governor's infrastructure plans. Then again, the surgeon's assistant swoops by wiping spittle from a patient's lips, humming a lullaby that suffices as prayer. You wonder if he hums to drown out his conscience or the anguish echoing in these dim corners. Dr. Barrow beckons a convict to fetch fresh water, and you step outside, drawn by the sunlight's taunting warmth. The yard is edged by a sagging fence where Aboriginal trackers once lingered, had they ever offered to teach colonial medics about native remedies. Some sources suggest Aboriginal bush medicine used melaleuca bark as an antiseptic. Historians still argue whether colonial surgeons recognized this or dismissed it as savages' concoctions. As you lean against the fence, a coil of ivy flickers in the breeze, a sliver of life unfazed by human decay. Inside again, Barrow prepares to lancing a swollen leg of the paler convict. He wears a leather apron that traps sweat like a sponge, and his face burns with frustration. He mutters, "If I had laudanum, Maybe the man could endure drain without delirium. Laudanum and opium tincture was a mainstay in England, but its scarcity in the colony made it as rare as silver. You swallow imagining a world where laudanum could dull pain, but also spiral men into addiction yen for opium-den escapes rather than convict camps. Historians still argue whether laudanum did more good than harm in colonial prisons. But today, you'd trade delirium for even one gulp of relief. The paler convict shrieks as Barrow plunges a hot iron rod into his leg to cauterize an abscess, the smell of burning flesh stinging your nostrils. You close your eyes, vision blurring into streaks of red and brown. The convict's scream crescendos, then cuts off abruptly, leaving a hollow hush. You wonder if that screaming echo floats out into the night, carried by moths that flit around the lantern's last glow. A surviving convict, one you recall from Section 5's chain gang, wheezes past, offering a nod of recognition. His face is pallid lips, curled by typhoid's furies. He shoves past you toward the surgeon's bench, murmuring, "Barrow, I need," before collapsing. You move to catch him, but two guards intercept, hefting him by each arm like a pair of frantic harvesters. You watch them haul the man into a side room labeled isolation, where the walls are whitewashed but smell of rot and fear. You step gingerly through the corridor, each dust mote floating like suspended death notices. A door clatters closed behind you, locking with a hollow click. You pause, realizing you're trapped on the wrong side of that door. Through the narrow barred window, you glimpse the guards dragging your friend across the threshold. His muffled cries echo for a moment, then fade, replaced by the buzzing of flies drawn to decay. A sense of dread curls in your gut. Once inside, he'll be left to simmer in filth until fever claims him. You swallow, thinking of the time Section 4's scourging left men stranded, but this fate seems worse. Invisible demons inside, no whip to trade pain. You exit into a small courtyard where a makeshift latrine stands reeking of human misery. You catch a glimpse of two surgeon's clerks huddled around a flickering oil lamp, tracing entry marks in a fresh ledger. New admissions: John Cartwright, malaria; Amos Barlow, night terrors, likely fever. You note their eyes flicker to you as though assessing if you're a potential new entry. Your chest constricts. Are you ill or merely haunted by witnessing others' doom? You wander to a dying fire pit scattered with charred bones from yesterday's scant meal. Hunger gnaws at your ribs, a hunger of both stomach and soul. Just beyond you, spot a tiny patch of verdant herb parsley. Unlikely, but perhaps a convict smuggled seeds to plant. You snatch a handful and chew, tasting a peppery shimmer. It's a fleeting luxury, a whisper of home. In England, parsley might have garnished roast. Here it serves as a bitter salve for a ravaged spirit. Sunset's orange glow seeps through cracks in the walls, casting elongated shadows across the yard. You remember Section 3's bush hunts here. The hunt is reversed. Doctors chase disease and prisoners flee health. The barter of life for labor exacts a steep toll. A scholar's phrase drifts in your mind. Historians still argue whether colonial medical neglect was a product of deliberate policy or logistical chaos, fueled by distance. Tonight, it feels like deliberate cruelty, masked as scarcity. You make your way back to your hut legs heavy as sludge. Inside, a convict midwife waits with a battered pot of weak stew, watered-down broth, and a few slivers of salted beef. You scoop a spoonful and savor the warmth more than taste, though each swallow whimpers against your bruised back. The midwife, a short woman in russet skirts, murmurs about preparing poultices of crushed bark for tomorrow's cases. You wonder if tomorrow you'll join them as patient rather than spectator. Lying on your straw mattress, you press a handful of poultice bits of wattle bark soaked in water against a knot of bone-deep pain in your ribs. The grit clings, but warmth seeps in a paradoxical comfort. You lean back, recalling Section 2's rat-infested decks, Section 6's scorching stockade labor, and now Section 9's specter of disease. You sense your body drifting into feverish half-dreams where the line between salutary sleep and septic delirium blurs. As darkness drapes over the colony, the infirmary's distant lamplight becomes a lonely star in a sea of oblivion. You pray for mercy, not from lash or stockade, but from the unseen plague's hand that gnaws at both bodies and spirits. You whisper a vow to remember every face you saw here, the coughing man, the convulsing youth, the pale specter in indigo breeches, and to tell the world their names, lest they fade into history's shadows. You close your eyes, drawing in a ragged breath, feeling every scar in your flesh as an atlas of suffering. If this hut cannot save you, perhaps your story will a flicker against the night, a warning that some punishments come not from rods or chains, but from neglect and the slow poison of indifference. As sleep claims you, you vow to dream not of escape, but of a world where a surgeon's skill and salt water doled out fairly could have saved hundreds of souls bound in hopeless bondage. You step out of the hospital's stale gloom into a sunlit clearing where the scent of eucalyptus mingles with the faint tang of campfire smoke. Today, you embark on a journey where bush law clashes with colonial rule. Your instructions accompany a small party to parley with local Aboriginal clans, hoping to secure food and avoid violent frays. A mainstream historical fact throughout the 1790s, British officials in New South Wales attempted diplomatic exchanges with Aboriginal leaders like Bennelong, who served as intermediaries. Though these meetings frequently collapsed in misunderstanding or violence, you likely won't survive this without picturing yourself inching through grass so tall it scratches your thighs, every rustle hinting at a lurking spear or silent sentinel. You trudge along a narrow track, convicts, forming a ragged line behind two Marines in russet coats. Their muskets reflect the morning sun, awkward symbols of empire in this land where long before they arrived, Aboriginal peoples thrived with boomerangs and bark canoes. You crunch on brittle leaves, recalling the strange sensation from Section 9's infirmary survival. Here hinges as much on knowing the land as on avoiding disease. A fringe tidbit, some convicts believed that hugging a red gum tree at dawn would cure scurvy, though whether that balm did more than scratch an itch remains a matter historians still argue. As you round a rocky outcrop, a group of Wiradjuri warriors emerges bare-chested, painted with ochre stripes, armed with wooden clubs and barbed spears. Their eyes flicker with equal parts curiosity and wariness. A Marine steps forward, raising his hat in greeting. "We come in peace." His voice cracks like a rook's call. Yet the language barrier yawns wide. They understand neither English nor the colonists' intentions. You remember, Section 7's escape pursuit if colonial trekkers laughed at your wild dance through the bush. These warriors watch with grave composure, unblinded by desperation or fear. The Marine offers a handful of rice and salted pork hardtack, really laying it on a bark platter. One older warrior, his hair shock white, reaches out and sniffs warily, then peels a leaf from a nearby wattle and tosses it over the meat as though warding off invisible spirits. A mainstream detail, early colonists observed Aboriginal people carefully examining European rations, sometimes discarding flour tainted by weevils or unripe grain. Historians still argue whether these cautious customs reflected nutritional knowledge or simple distaste for foreign tastes. Meanwhile, your stomach clenches you'd kill for a fresh yabby rather than harboring moldy pork under a leaf. Suddenly, a young warrior no older than 18 steps forward with a boomerang in hand. He wields it not as a weapon, but as a baton of communication. He tosses it skillfully so that it arcs like a crescent and lands in front of your group. The Marine picks it up and squeaks, "Yours." The young man nods gravely, indicating by nodding again that in exchange he desires the radio-looking object slung at your hip, actually a carpenter's chisel. Lacking shared language, you sense this is a gesture of reciprocity, your chisel for their boomerang. You glance at the chisel, a convict scribe prize no longer of use. You nod and hand it over. The young warrior lets out a half smile, unsheathes the boomerang, and brandishes it in a subtle dance message sent. You kneel to inspect the warriors more closely, noticing their bodies adorned with wattle paint, russet swirls around shoulders, ochre streaked across forearms, signifying ancestral totems. Their calm strength humbles you. You recall Section 2's rat-infested decks. Once you envied your animal companions for thriving in squalor. Here, these men stand fearless in their land. The Marine, eager to solidify peace, angles out a few grains of rice toward them. One warrior pokes a grain with a spear tip, tastes it, and grunts neither approval nor disgust. You chew a handful yourself, the soggy kernel gumming up your jaw. It tastes like river mud, but relief floods your throat more than flavor. As midday slants over the clearing, a second contingent of colonist settlers from nearby Parramatta arrives, bearing fresh blankets and an iron pot of boiled mutton. You're to witness a gift for good ceremony intended to broker a non-aggression pact. You note that the colonists approach with stiff courtesy, overlaying brittle politeness atop deep-seated fear. A settler woman in a saffron kerchief holds out the mutton pot, her hands trembling. "Please share with our neighbors," she says. The elders regard it slowly, as though they hold their own time. One takes an ember from a smoldering fire pit, touches it to his lips, and then traces a cross in the dust, an enigmatic signal, perhaps a ritual of blessing or a plea against spiritual harm. Historians still argue whether such rituals were truly reciprocal or covert methods of asserting moral superiority. While the two groups mill about, you wander to a nearby creek where the warriors once fetched water at dawn. The water glints emerald under the midday sun. You glimpse finger-length eels slipping between submerged rocks, an aboriginal staple that colonists often dismissed as alley rats. Without waiting for permission, you crouch and cup water in your hands. A warrior grips your shoulder, guiding you to a shallow pool teeming with tadpole-sized yabbies. You scoop one into your palm, feeling its tiny claws clamp. He grins, showing sanged teeth, and skims a broken-off shard of bark to spear a yabby eyes, still sinking into your realization that survival here meant more than simply avoiding chains. It meant knowing how to catch crustaceans with bark and bare wits. You return to the clearing bearing that humble harvest. The Marine and the settlers exchange faculty-laden glances. Will the Aboriginal people welcome this catch or scorn your paltry offering? The elder woman with skin like weathered parchment accepts plucking a yabby by its tail and popping it into her mouth. She chews thoughtfully, then nods approvingly and tosses the shell aside. You exhale, tasting dust-laced regret you'd traded your chisel for myrtle-flavored acceptance, yet at least you glimpse how land and its gifts can knit wary parties together. As afternoon shadows stretch, the leaders convene around the bark-woven circle. A tall aboriginal sentinel drums on hollowed wood, and a settler man in a russet coat 3 sizes too large claps in awkward imitation. The sound is cacophonous, a reminder that assimilation feels forced, like fitting a square peg into a round hole dug by strangers. You sense that this fragile ceremony teeters on a razor's edge, a misplaced step, a disrespected tradition, and the tenuous piece could snap like a gum twig. You drift closer, watching a conversation unfold in gestures, the abdominal pat of an elder speaking of country, followed by a marshal's attempt to respond in broken pidgin. You focus on the elder's eyes, sharp, reflective pools of ancient memory. He beckons the settlers to follow him to a granite outcrop where ochre stones lie used for ceremonial paintings. The settlers follow notebooks in hand-scrawling gibberish. The elder grinds a pebble into paint powder. With a larger rock, the ground resonates with authority. He dips a twig into the ochre mix, touches it to your arm, sketching a simple arc that resembles a crescent moon. You feel the cool pigment smudge onto reddened skin, a momentary badge of belonging. The settlers mimic by fashioning crude crosses in the dirt with leftover animal fat and whisker-thin sticks. The elder watches impassive as stone. A Marine coughs, perhaps a signal that the afternoon contracts into tension. You recall Section 8's showdown with trackers. Today's threat lacks gunfire, but roars just as potent beyond worlds. If the settlers offend, violence could erupt instantaneously. If the warriors mistrust, every concession crumbles. The drums skitter into a steady beat, and an elder woman begins singing, her voice lilting like a creek's whisper. The settlers fall silent, eyes flicking among themselves. You close your eyes, the melody knitting you into a tapestry of place that transcends penal colony's harshness. For a heartbeat, you sense connection with something primal, beyond iron bars, beyond convict labels, a shared humanity that pulses in the heart of this ancient land. Mid-song, a startled shout rings out. A settler youth trips over a hidden root, crashing into the ochre pile and smearing red dust across his breeches. The elders pause. Tension coils like a python. The youth scrambles up, rubbing his pants, his face a mask of terror. Did he desecrate sacred ground or simply clumsily enliven ceremony? The female singer's melody stutters, and the sentinel, who had been drumming, halts and fixes the youth with a gaze that boils silence. You hold your breath. As you exhale comfort that the elder woman instead offers him a handkerchief to clean the dust, avoiding a disastrous blow-up. She whispers something soothing, unclear but unmistakable in intent. The sentinel resumes drumming. The song breathes again, smoother now as forgiveness ripples across the clearing. You exhale, noticing how your heart's drumbeat syncs with the ritual beat. In that moment, the chasm between colonist and Aboriginal storyteller seems bridged, if only for a few fragile minutes. You recall Section 1's opening the colony as both hope and horror. Here, you glimpse both extremes, mistrust and mercy, dancing together like spears and wattle blossoms. As twilight creeps upon the clearing, the group parts ways, conditions of peace spelled out in gestures and shared tobacco, and offering the Aboriginal people treasure beyond coin. You see the elder dip a strip of possum skin into water, stretch it between fingers, and fashion a small pouch cradling tobacco leaves. He extends it to a waiting settler reciprocity, sealed in fragrant smoke. A mainstream detail by the early 19th century colonial authorities recognized Aboriginal tobacco's symbolic importance, even as they debated whether exchanging tobacco diffused conflict or encouraged dependency. Historians still argue whether these cross-cultural trades fostered genuine respect or merely coded submission. Night descends as you wander back through the bush guided by a crescent moon. The air cool shadows elongate and the scent of gum flickers faintly. You carry in your mind the drumming, the red ochre arc on your arm, and the soft ripple of forgiveness. But alongside this, you feel the chill reminder that these accords can unravel at dawn. Stolen livestock trespasses, or simply the colony's thirst for more land, could reignite hostilities with savage abandon. As you reach camp, the Marines escort the Aboriginal contingency to the settlement edge. You stand at ease, but your muscles ache with awareness the bush offers refuge, yet the settlement's white fences lure you like a false promise. You ask yourself, who truly owns the land? A question echoing Section 2's convicts' arrival. Sometimes victory means surviving the journey. Sometimes merely witnessing and carrying a story forward. You sink onto a log near the flickering campfire, pressing your fingers into the ochre smear that still clings to your skin, a living token of fragile unity. A convict buddy shares a nod. You both saw something that few others have: the land's power to forge peace and the colony's hunger to corrode it. You lean back, eyes trailing constellations that Aboriginal elders have named for thousands of moons. Tonight, you sleep under the same stars they once honored, wear the same earth that binds your flesh, feeling a fleeting kinship with both prisoner and landowner, both settler and First People. As you drift off, a single thought lingers: if the bush can still weave moments of understanding, maybe survival in this penal colony requires more than muscle and fear. It demands humility and a willingness to listen. You hope that humility lasts longer than the embers of tonight's peace carried on dawn's first breath of gum-scented air. You jolt awake before dawn, the embers of last night's fire glowing pale embers behind your lids, and realize today's path leads you into the belly of the colony's bureaucracy. The courthouse steps where justice is doled out like stale bread. Picture yourself stepping onto cracked sandstone, dawn's pale light casting long accusatory shadows across the wharf-lined esplanade. You probably won't survive this part without picturing your own trial for a minor infraction, maybe a scuffed boot or a whispered complaint spiraling into a death sentence. A mainstream historical fact, the colonial legal system in New South Wales borrowed heavily from English common law but with fewer safeguards. By 1815, over 200 convicts had been hanged for crimes ranging from theft of clothes to recidivist burglary punishments that colonists defended as deterrents. You follow a line of shackled convicts toward the half-built courthouse, an unassuming two-story structure of unpainted timber and limestone piles of lime still littering the unfinished portico. Governor Lachlan Macquarie insisted on constructing a formal court to impose order, but its skeletal frame looks more like a gaunt scaffold ready for gallows than a temple of justice. A fringe tidbit rumor held that during early sessions the judge's bench was so precarious that lawyers risked collapsing through the floorboards. A precarious feature, historians still argue, was due to woodworm infestations or simply money mismanagement. Either way, the courthouse's unstable timber echoes the shaky moral footing of colonial law. You shuffle forward, ankles bound in chains, heart hammering. The magistrate's bench lifts you above the crowd like a predator surveying prey. The magistrate, dressed in a rumpled black coat and powdered wig that attests to a century-old tradition, leans forward, eyes hooded, ready to mete out verdicts before day fully blooms. You recall Section 8's flogging and Section 9's infirmary horrors, and wonder if today you'll watch your own name sealed in ink, destined for a hanging notice. The session begins. A constable rattles a jar of keys, clinking their promise of fate. First on the docket, a petty larceny case, Jack Ridley, a gaunt figure in teal breeches accused of stealing a loaf of bread. His defense is halting. "I was starving, your worship." The magistrate's stoic face betrays no mercy. Yet behind you whispers, ripple convict sympathizers, argue that theft under famine conditions should merit clemency. Historians still argue whether early colonial judges showed leniency or used harsh sentences to reinforce discipline. The magistrate wraps his gavel, actually a simple mallet carved from mahogany, and says, "Guilty." Sentence 39 lashes on the bare back. A collective sigh wafts through the crowd, not hangings today, but a beating that will echo in Ridley's bones forever. He flinches as constables drag him to a whipping post propped near the courthouse's side entrance, an architectural afterthought so close to the temple it suggests punishment and justice march hand in hand. You steel yourself dreading the lacerating crack that will rend Ridley's skin as the magistrate departs for the next case. Next is a more dramatic affair. Martha Kendall, a widow in a saffron kerchief, accused of obscenity, uttering seditious phrases about the governor after a drunken speech at the local tavern. You recall hearing that some convicts dubbed Macquarie the giant cormorant, a pale jab at his voracious appetite for fines and regulations. Now, Martha stands before the bench, tear-stained cheeks glistening like dew on a gorse bush. The prosecutor reads from her sworn deposition, quoting her exact words, "I spit on Macquarie's head. If he dares, ship me back to the Isles." The magistrate narrows his eyes. Social order hinges on deference, especially from women convicts. A quirky detail: early colonial records show nearly half of women charged with insubordination were former midwives wielding verbal skill as deftly as any surgeon's scalpel. Historians still argue whether midwives threatened patriarchal authority more acutely than male convicts. Martha lifts her chin, voice quivering. "He took me land after my man died, left me nothing but curses to feed on." A murmur rustles through assembled settlers. Some nod, struck by her plight. Others sneer, reminded that grief does not excuse sedition. The magistrate's verdict: guilty as charged. 6 months hard labor in the public works gang, plus a fine of 5 shillings or 10 lashes. You wince at the choice. Martha sinks to her knees, wiping tears, praying for week-old bread rather than the whip's sting. Hard labor will tear her hands raw as she hauls stones for the expanding war. Her shoulders slump, and guards usher her away. The dirt around the courthouse shifts as more convicts shuffle forward, accused of everything from illicit gambling to failing to attend morning prayers. You notice a cluster of wealthy settlers in indigo and saffron coats, sneering as they sip tea delivered by 4 trembling servants, their conversation laced with disdain for those lazy thieves, while oblivious to their own complicity in a system built on forced labor. A mainstream observation, late 18th century New South Wales saw a growing class divide between free settlers and convicts. With the latter demonized in print, historians still argue whether settlers' fear of convict uprisings fueled their harsh rhetoric or masked genuine anxiety at facing labor shortages. Your awaiting moment arrives, convicted of contempt for the magistrate after refusing to tip your cap at last month's muster. You shuffle forward as the constable calls Peter Haraway. That's you. You stare at the bench, recalling Section 7's escape attempt. Today, you face official condemnation for insolence rather than the bush's wild tracts. The magistrate's lips curve downward as he reads the charge. You failed to remove your hat and bow your head in acknowledgement of colonial authority. This is an affront to the crown. A hush ripples. You thought a hat slight mere formality, not treason. You swallow hard, stumbling like a crippled colt. The magistrate recites your plea for mercy, but offers none. By my judgment, he intones, you receive 50 lashes and confinement at the lash post for 3 days. You hear the crowd gasp, 50 lashes for a hat. A hush falls, and even the guards glance at each other, eyebrows raised at the severity. The magistrate's clerk fumbles ink on parchment, sealing your fate as if slapping a death warrant on paper. You're led outside once again, hammering each step into the soft earth armor of anticipation pressing heavy on your back. The whipping post stands ready, freshly oiled ropes coiled at its base, and a basin of salt water perched nearby. A gaunt guard cleans the whip leather with kangaroo oil, reclaiming its supple bite. You press your cheek to the post leather, burning through your shirt sleeve. A hush descends as the first lash cracks the air like a cannon blast, its echo bouncing off courthouse walls. The whip tears flesh from spine to shoulders, the salt water thereafter stinging like 1,000 needles pressed to bleeding flesh. On the 80th lash, yes 50 for the offense, and 30 extra for impudence, you collapse to the dirt, gasping for mercy. The magistrate long ago refused you. Blood soaks your sleeve. Your hands tremble as you're granted a meager bowl of water. You gulp it in stiff gulps, relishing the liquid's reprieve more than any tears you might shed. A convict doctor leans in, murmuring something about danger of sepsis, but you barely hear him as adrenaline floods your veins. You stagger back toward your hut, shoulders sagging, mind reeling, with a mixture of shame and defiance, refusing to bow cost you 100 stripes, and you wonder if the cluster of settlers sipping tea upstairs feels any shame for watching. Inside your hut, you press a cloth over your wounds, each fabric thread catching on the torn skin. You think back to Section 10's parley with Aboriginal clans where reciprocity offered lifelines. Here, reciprocity dies beneath a magistrate's mallet, leaving no space for forgiveness. You slump onto your straw mattress joints, groaning. Each breath tastes of salt and iron, a morning's breakfast far heavier than bread. Night falls, and you drift into feverish dreams, images of the courthouse's flames consuming iron hinges conjured by a delicate blend of rage and delirium. The line between victim and villain blurs, and in your mind, you court both roles with equal fervor. You jolt awake sweating, realizing that colonial justice is a beast that thrives on fear and thrives on punishment. As you lie back, you feel the fresh wound's heat pulsing against your shirt and recall the magistrate's final words. This is the law here. You close your eyes, embracing a paradox. To survive means to obey, but to retain your humanity demands rebellion. The night's darkness offers no answer, only a hush broken by the distant creak of the floggings post, promising another sunrise where law and life remain cruel bedfellows. You blink awake as a low murmur drifts through the barracks' wooden walls. Tonight's currency is not coin, but clandestine chatter about poker games, rum deals, and the latest wink and nod brothel rumor. You probably won't survive this part without picturing your own rough-hewn table stacked with flawed playing cards, a contraband pouch of guinea buttons for bet-keeping, and the occasional brawl erupting over a bent copper. In the penal colony, convict society thrived on its own underground economy. A mainstream historical fact notes that by 1810, a flourishing market in pot sweets and target hats had emerged, where pots meant cooking vessels, sweets meant sugar rations shared or stolen, and target hats, spirits distilled from boiled grain, flew across hands faster than reeds in a storm. You roll over on your straw mattress, listening to the faint scrape of a gambler's knife-shaped tool, carving score lines into a splintered plank. As darkness settles, you tiptoe toward a dimly lit corner where a half-dozen convicts hunch over a makeshift table planks laid across as empty rum barrels. Their faces glow by a single tallow candle, flickering shafted shadows on quartered skull. Not an omen, but a gnawed half-circle of wood shaped like a target hat. A fringed tidbit. Some convicts claimed that if you took a sliver of bread, soaked it in rum, and then let it dry in the sun, you could later bite it for a quick fortification before a work detail. Historians still argue whether dried-on rum residue actually served as an effective morale booster or merely prolonged delirium tremens. You step closer, and a wiry man in teal breeches glances up, whispering, "Jack the Spinner's in for 2 pots, loses his last ration of salt pork if he folds." You spot Jack, his cheeks gaunt, but eyes bright, shuffling a stack of makeshift cards crafted from torn hymn book pages. The others chew on nicknames like Limey Lou and Scabby Sam, each a jolt of notoriety that confers street cred more precious than the governor's pardon. You slide onto an overturned bucket, jostling the table, and a scabby hand flares a flicker of irritation. Careful, mate, or it's your rations next. You nod, offering a crooked smile and prod for a seat. With rhythmic tapping your signal, you're ready to play. The game begins 3-card brag, popular among convicts for its simplicity and bite-sized bets. You fumble a card, your fingers stiff from last night's cold and fear. Yet the moment the trump card flips, your pulse hums with excitement, a fugitive thrill undercut by dread of discovery. The man next to you, Muddy Joe, so named for his perpetually stained boots, lays down a brag chest puffed as if he holds the colony's secret drinking water. A hush falls. You sense even the rats nesting under the floor pause to listen. You up the ante with a scoop of sugar deemed sacred by any convict with a sweet tooth. For sugarmen, once traded stolen shirt buttons, a pinch of tea, or a few lines of tobacco from the master's snuff. You count out 6 sugar crystals, dropping them into the center. They glint like tiny jewels, each one a microcosm of colonial temptation. Muddy Joe snorts in derision, but pushes forward, risking a leg of salting beef if he loses. You hold your breath as he reveals his hand, a trio of 9s. You reluctantly fold yours, a mismatched pair. He sweeps the sugar bowl into his ragged jacket and grins wide enough to reveal a missing tooth and a lingering addiction to mischief. Your night's prospect dimming, you rise to fetch more sugar from your private stash tucked beneath a plank in your bunk. A soft snore rumbles behind you. Someone asleep despite the stakes. You stretch, sensing the damp wood press into your spine, and return with 2 crumbs, trading them for a share of the next hand. The game continues until a barked warning, guards making rounds, scatters the table like startled magpies. You snatch your pillaged sugar crumbs and melt back into the inky corridor, each footstep echoing the hush of colony curfew. Outside, the moon hangs low, casting silver lattice through the barred windows. You tiptoe toward the mess tent, where contraband whiskey passes hand to hand. A convict, leaning against a barrel, nods at you, pressing a gnawed, cork-wrapped pouch into your palm. One taste, but keep it under your tongue. The scent will carry you off to the stocks. You press your face into the pouch, inhaling burnt grain and charred oak liquid fire waiting to baptize your lungs. A single sip scorches your throat, forging a lull in anxiety. For a heartbeat, you're free from tick-tock fear of lash or victim sled. A scholar's note lingers. Historians still debate whether rum rations once promised to convicts who completed labor quotas, bolstered productivity, or fueled illicit gangs, plotting petty uprisings on death's door. Drawing back, you slip into the rat-rutted chapel doorway, where a handful of priests whisper prayers that convict gamblers believe are unintelligible mumbo-jumbo. You lean against a pew, dissolving the whiskey under your tongue, its bloom warm in the cold night air. You think of Section 10's diplomatic mission, contrasting pardoned Aboriginal courtesies with this raw barter of vice and risk. If diplomacy meant trading chisel for boomerang here, you'd trade souls for fleeting comfort handcrafted from fermented misery. A distant honk, know a challenge from convicts down by the stables, an illegal cockfight is slated for moonrise. You follow the sound metal clanks on leather toward a makeshift ring where two roosters tethered by hemp string flap crimson plumage. A trio of convicts cheers stoked by last week's brawl when old Billy the Butcher won a stag shin bone for his cutthroat bird. You recall a quirky detail: some convicts kept roosters in straw-packed chests, under bunks feeding them scraps until fight night. Historians still argue whether these chicken coups spurred community solidarity or simply deepened colony brutality. A corpulent man in indigo vest, Fat Tom, claps you on the shoulder shouting, "Fancy a bet on the Red Devil?" You cringe as you note the bird's pugnacious stance, its spurs gleaming like starlight in the dim. You slip out of his grip, opting instead for a sideline vantage. The roosters clash with savage precision, each spurred kick ripping feathers, drawing blood that splatters the straw like macabre confetti. The gurgle of vain courage and the crowd's raucous jeers feel like a bone-deep shudder here. Men gamble away scraps of humanity on feathered gladiators. You retreat, shaking off the primal urge to join, and wander toward the colony's laundry yard, a remnant of female convict labor, neatly stacked washboards glinting in starlight. There you find a lone woman in saffron skirt pressed to a low-watt lamp, sewing a quilt from tattered blankets. She hums a lullaby that curls around your thoughts like gauze, reminding you of home and innocence. You recall Section 8's flogging, starved of mercy, and now see that even harsh routines have soft interludes. You approach offering a stolen scrap of linen. She glances up, eyes wary but grateful. Together, you stitch thread, drawing you closer to a fragile hearth of empathy. As midnight approaches, the hush of camp settles into a woven lullaby of distant snoring and creaking timber. You retreat to your bunk, nestling beside a co-conspirator who introduces himself as Silent Sam, for his vow never to squill on accomplices. He reveals that tonight's botched pilfering of the surgeon's honeypot netted a single jar now shared among close friends. The jar, he says, tastes like ambrosia and relief. You uncork it, inhaling sticky sweetness, and swirl a droplet on your tongue, a small solace to a savage place. You close your eyes, mind swirling with cards, cockfights, clandestine whiskey, and quilted compassion. Somewhere between desire and desperation lies survival, and in this colony that line is etched not just in lash scars, but in shared vices and whispered alliances. You think if tomorrow brings another dawn of colonial decree, at least tonight you tasted stolen honey and found a heartbeat of humanity in the darkness. As the lenticular moon sinks behind eucalyptus silhouettes, you drift toward a shaky sleep, carrying a covert smile. Tomorrow they can flog and hang you, but tonight you gambled and gathered light in shared whispers. You hold on to that warmth like a sleeping fox in winter's cold, knowing that even in a penal colony, small acts of defiance and solidarity can keep you alive a little longer. You blink awake to the low rumble of a thunderstorm rolling over the distant blue mountains, feeling the damp chill seep through the hut's cracked floorboards, as though the world itself conspires against you. Today, you're to attempt the unthinkable, slipping the iron shackle from your leg and vanishing into the vast Australian bush alongside two brothers who speak in whispers of freedom. You probably won't survive this without picturing your heart pounding like a runaway cart, every snap of a twig sounding like a stockade shackle snapping shut. A mainstream historical fact in 1815, the infamous Cook's River Boys, a band of convict escapees, staged a holdup on Parramatta Road, emboldening scores of convicts to test the wilderness's promise of liberty. Yet escape here is a treacherous gamble. The bush is as likely to claim your life as the colonial catch-and-return patrols. You nudge your fellow escapee Isaac Reynolds, once a tailor, now gaunt from starvation, who lifts his tawny face eyes glowing with a feverish hope. At his side is his younger brother Jeremiah, scrawny and silent, since landing 2 years ago for poaching an eel from government lands. You swap the tiniest nod, a pact sealed without words. At first light, you slip from the chain gang into the tangled hum of gum trees where freedom and death share a breath. A quirky fringe tidbit, some fugitive convicts believed that rubbing themselves with emu fat would mask their scent from tracking dogs. Historians still argue whether indigenous trackers dismissed that ruse as common sense or merely smiled at convict superstition. The rain taps a mortal rhythm on the corrugated iron roof as you rise and pry the loose chain shackle from your ankle, a risky feat you practiced by night, using a stolen nail pilfered from the governor's lumber pile. Each link slides free with a metallic hiss, echoing your labored inhale. You fold the shackle into your ragged tunic, folding your bare foot onto the damp straw sensation like stepping on a living thing. A lash of lightning flickers through the narrow window, illuminating the hut's rough interior. A single wooden cot, a bucket half filled with rainwater, and a torn sheet rolled back to reveal your fellow fugitives' faces, taut with anticipation and dread. You slide the patched door open, greeted by a gust of wind that whips rain sideways like a curtain of glass. The other two follow, and together you slip across the yard, your footsteps sucking in mud that clings like hungry leeches. The guard's lantern glows in the distance atop the guard tower, an unblinking eye you must evade. You crouch behind a broken wheelbarrow, feeling its splintered wood press into your cheek as the guard's boots thunder past, too distant to detect your breath. You wait until his silhouette disappears into the shadows before edging toward the fence line. Your heart thuds as the three of you scuttle beneath the paling fence boots, skidding on mud. Outside, the world is an untamed cathedral of towering eucalyptus, their gnarly limbs swaying under the storm's assault. You breathe deep, tasting wet earth and salt-laced sap. The law says you should be chained and marched to a whipping post. Yet here you stand, root-bound by neither chain nor shackles. Only the choice between death in the bush or a slow death in the stockade. You push forward each step, taking you into a cathedral of dripping ferns and knee-high grasses. The thunder's rumble lulls you into a frenzied calm. Every rustle of leaves signals either salvation or doom. You recall Section 6's stockade labor, the punishing sun imprinting your skin like a brand. Now you walk into the greater furnace of the outback, where sunlight is less predictable, but equally relentless. A fringe rumor floats in your mind. Some bush rangers painted stripes in their chests with sandalwood paste, believing it rendered them invisible to colonial trackers. Historians still argue whether such tactics truly fooled dogs or merely fueled myth. You trudge through a creek swollen with rainwater, the current tugging at your ankles as you cross. One false step and the whirling eddy could sweep you downstream, robbing you of both hope and warmth. You recall stories of escapees who drowned trying to ford that same creek, words like Sarat's ghost whispered among convicts, referring to a man who vanished into the river and re-emerged as rumor. You cling to a wattle sapling, its bark slick with rain, and hoist yourself onto the opposite bank, panting as though your lungs are dragging chains themselves. Beyond the creek, the bush thickens. Tall grass trees loom like spears pointed skyward, and masses of lantana tangle your legs in a vivacious grip. You hear the squawk of a magpie nature's sentinel alerting the bush to your presence. You strain for the low rumble of horseshoe-clad hooves, knowing that mounted trackers launched from Parramatta could be on your heels by sunrise. Yet the very same bush that corners you might conceal your escape-stark gum trees stand like silent sentinels guiding you forward, their broad canopies forming a green cathedral roof that promises anonymity. You guide Reynolds and Jeremiah to a stump smoothed by fire, where convicts once left messages carved in charcoal initials, surrounded by crude drawings of shackles and stockades. You add your own mark, a gaunt fist clutching a broken link to signify solidarity and defiance. It feels like a prayer scrawled onto bark, a plea to nature to protect you as protectors failed. You press your palm to the stump, feeling the ridged grooves as though touching the rough-hewn memory of those who dared before you. As midday approaches, the rain slackens into a gentle drizzle that seems to lull you into complacency. Yet the storm has turned the bush into a labyrinth. Every fallen log, every gully could hide, tracking snares or aboriginal warriors guarding their own country. You recall Section 10's parley had you shown enough respect to local clans. You have no time to consult the nuanced treaties of guilt and gratitude. You must run. You tighten your grip on the stolen nail heart, quaking at the thought of encountering a spear or a poisoned ringtail. A sharp crack splits the air as a branch snaps underfoot. Your brothers freeze, scanning the shadows as though sensing blades behind those drips of rain. You edge deeper, relying on memory of convict whispers that guided you through similar terrain on nighttime escapades. You stumble over a stony ridge, nearly face-planting into mud. Jeremiah steadies you, his eyes wide with equal parts fear and exhilaration. He offers a nod, an unspoken reassurance that you're not alone in this perilous gamble. Suddenly, a piercing whistle cuts through the hush familiar as a cock crow in some half-remembered dawn. It's the signal from the beach patrol halt and surrender. A mounted soldier emerges horse's flanks, heaving bayonet glinting. You can feel the urgency roiling in your gut, either dash for cover or face certain capture. You glance at Reynolds and Jeremiah, eyes locked, fists clenched, timing your flight like a dare. At their nod, you spin and sprint, boots churning mud adrenaline, igniting every muscle fiber. The soldier calls out again, his voice echoing among the gums, "Stand or be shot." But the soldier underestimates your desperation. You dart between towering stands of eucalypt, skidding around a flicker of white collar, a colonist tracker, no doubt trained in reading broken branches. You hear the crack of a rifle firing dust rockets at your heel as you lunge forward, heart thundering. The bullet whistles past your left ear, embedding itself in a rotting log, as though harvesting a prayer for your survival. You dive into a fern-covered gully water, seeping around your ankles as you press yourself against cold earth. Above, the horse's snort and ordering whip echo like thundered shame. You feel the soldier's hand lift the rifle to scan your hiding spot. Your breath puffs in the frigid dawn air as if exhaling a confession. A flutter of leaves betrays your trembling, and the barrel's tip swivels toward you. Control your breathing, you tell yourself, each inhale a mountain to conquer. You imagine Section 11's courthouse scenes. Had you broken their law? Yes, but your crime here stems from a primal yearning for freedom, not petty theft or sedition. Suddenly, a shriek cuts through the tension. A wedge-tailed eagle soars overhead, raking the sky with outstretched wings. The soldier flinches momentarily, captivated by the hawk's majesty offering you a precious heartbeat of escape. You squeeze through thick masses of manuka and lance yourself forward, the crackle of branches underfoot propelling you like a swallowed arrow. You vault a fallen bough and sprint across a sunlit clearing heart, hammering a war drum's crescendo as raindrops glitch in sunbeams like broken glass. By some blessing, the pursuer's yelp grows distant, muffled by the wind writhing through gum leaves. You keep running, eyes fixed in the silhouette of a mountain ridge, fringing the horizon, a beacon of relative safety where few colonists tread. Each step drains you. Your chest burns as though aflame. You recall Section 6's forced marches. This journey offers no convoy to rest your aching legs, only the brutal trial of your mortal will. As afternoon sun fractures through departing clouds, you emerge at a narrow creek lined with tea-tree saplings. You kneel and cup water, trembling as you lift it to parched lips. The water's taste is bittersweet with tannin, the earth's reprieve, as though whispering that survival here hinges on humility. Bend to drink from nature's cradle, not from a scullery bucket heaped with stale ration. Reynolds and Jeremiah appear moments later, mud-slick figures of exhaustion and relief. They collapse at the creek's bank, gasping. You remain alert, sweat clinging like guilt. You offer your shirt to fashion a rudimentary bandage for Jeremiah's bleeding shin. He tripped and gashed it on a jagged rock, a wound that, if neglected, might sprout infection worse than the guard's bullets. You tear a strip of linen, wrap the wound, and whisper reassurances. Hold tight, brother. Bush medicine is harsh but healing. A fringed tidbit floats to mind. Some bush rangers use crushed tea-tree leaves as antiseptic poultices. Historians still argue whether this practice originated from Aboriginal knowledge or convict improvisation. Twilight seeps into the forest, and you begin fashioning a shelter from broken branches and dried grasses. Leaning on techniques borrowed from Aboriginal trackers, you glimpsed in Section 10. You dig a shallow pit, cover it with bark and grass, creating a crude bivouac that shields you from cold dew. You draw a line in the mud, mother and father country, a demarcation between the convict chains behind you and the open sky above. As you huddle beneath your shelter, the rhythmic croak of frogs in the distance morphs into a lullaby. You press your palm to damp earth, feeling its pulse alive beneath your fingertips. For a fleeting moment, you sense freedom's exhilarating fragility, a breath held between life and death. You exhale the release, a shudder through your bones. Tomorrow, you must press on deeper into unknown territories where no colonial man's boot has marred the ground. But tonight, you breathe under a blanket of stars that stretch across the Southern Cross, ancient even as convicts shackled under the same heavens. You allow yourself to dream not of escape or recapture, but of a world where freedom fuses with responsibility, where survival doesn't demand sacrificing your soul for survival. And as you slip into an uneasy sleep, the distant howl of dingoes drifts through the eucalyptus, a reminder that the bush remains sovereign, untamed by convicts' laws or colonial decrees. In this land, to survive is to respect the rhythms of nature, to heed its whispers, and to walk with humility between fear and hope, guided by the flicker of dawn's uncertain promise. You stir beneath the narrow canopy of gum and bracken as dawn's pale fingers pry light from night's lingering grasp. And you realize your journey's only halfway done. Now begins the real test of bushcraft and cunning as you scavenge for food and seek hints of civilization. You probably won't survive this stretch without picturing your empty belly gnawing at itself while your limbs shake from thirst. A mainstream historical fact, convicts who successfully eluded capture often survived by eating grubs goanna or edible roots resources aboriginal peoples harvested with deep knowledge of the land. A fringe tidbit, some fugitives believed a ghost yam grew under decayed logs, though historians still argue whether such tubers existed or were merely mythic hope to guide starving men. You shake Jeremiah awake, prompting his sunken eyes to blink against morning's glare. Reynolds stirs groaning like a wounded wombat. You pat your leather satchel, the sole receptacle for stolen flour, half a squeaky candle, and a rusted knife. Your ankle wound itches beneath its crude bandage. The dampness of night's dew seeped in. You flex your toes. The absence of leg irons feels surreal, like budding wings. Today, you trek northward, paralleling the river, heard distant at night, hoping to find water and game. The bush before you rumbles with unseen life, high-pitched cockatoos screech overhead, and tiny hatchlings call from hollows. Your breath hitching, you swallow the memory of Section 13's thunderous creak. Crossing this morning's task feels as lethal as storm-choked rapids. You lead your companions through a tunnel of tall grass that glistens with dew, each blade lacing your ankles like spectral fingers. You spy your gait to avoid snapping twigs. Any sudden noise could alert trackers or trigger a snake strike. The undergrowth parts to reveal a cluster of warded rocks where a shallow puddle clings to shelter. You bend cupping murky water and sipping carefully, tasting earth's tang of tannin and leaf. You notice tiny tadpoles swirling and swallow the thought that this life teem's just beyond the convict lash. Reynolds and Jeremiah kneel beside you, sharing your ration of water, 2 shallow scoops apiece. You recall Section 12's gambit of stolen rum and sugar here. Water is a currency more precious than stolen coin. Your stomach lurches as you recall yesterday's scant yabbies, refuge for your battered souls, but mere morsels for bodies starved for protein. You muster the courage to probe for edible roots, spiky matted clumps of nodding noddiers, a type of wild tuber noted in convict journals as both bitter and thirst-quelling. You draw your rusted knife slice into damp earth and unearth two small whitish tubers. You jab at them, then snap off a piece, wincing at the chalky texture. You chew the tuber's bitterness coating your throat and sparking a faint bolt of relief. Or is that dread? Historians still argue whether these tubers truly quenched starvation or merely served as bush placeholders until proper rations returned. Regardless today, they stave off your fainting. Mid-morning sun blisters through eucalyptus canopy, spotlighting dancing motes of pollen. You press on, heading downhill toward the sound of burbling water. You glimpse through foliage. Each step your thighs burn, joints stiffen under past floggings reminders. You inhale, tasting whiffs of peppermint gum leave something an Aboriginal guide once taught you might relieve nausea or quell fevers. You pluck a leaf, crush it between thumb and forefinger, and breathe its scent deep, a fleeting comfort in a land that offers no sympathy. Ahead, you spot a family of kangaroos lazing in dappled shade, powerful legs bunching beneath them, ears twitching at every rustle. You debate firing a makeshift spear, but Reynolds shakes his head. A missed shot would alert troopers. Instead, you watch until they bound away in a russet blur, leaving behind hoof-shaped impressions in muddy ground. You press your hand to one, channeling their silent strength, a call you cannot decode. Your fevered mind flashes to legends of bushrangers communing with outback spirits, lore that some thieves found guidance in kookaburra song or kangaroo tracks. Historians still argue whether these traditions passed from Aboriginal custodians to desperate convicts or emerged from convicts' own imaginations. You skirt a gully that curves into a stream, its water reflecting sky as though revealing secrets. The gully's sides drape with moss and maidenhair, delicate green tapestry cushioning a trickle of freshness. You tread lightly, reaching down to drink silt-laden water. As you sip, you glimpse a flash of white on the opposite bank, a battered tin pan tied to a gum sapling. A convict's marker, perhaps, from a prior fugitive who passed here days, no weeks ago. You approach, heart-hammering. The pan bears a crude carving. E arrived here, a single initial, a cryptic echo of another man's failed flight warns that you're not alone in this quest. You swallow a catch of solidarity mixed with dread. Another convict triggered this sign. But did he find sanctuary or rot beneath these gums? You glance at Jeremiah's pale face. A feverish sheen glints across his forehead. You flank him as he kneels by the pan, pressing his ear to the water's surface as though hearing secrets rippling downstream. You recall Section 11's hanging verdicts today. You confront a far graver sentence, starvation and exposure. The creek's promise of water must be balanced against its fraught path. Tracking dogs could slurp its edges, honing in on your scent. But thirst claws at your consciousness like a famished dingo driving you to risk exposure. You motion Isaac to climb upstream, where large flat stones form a rude stepping path. He obliges, grabbing a branch for balance. The water gurgles around your calves. You press onward until you find a small waterfall, the creek plunging over lichen-covered rock, its spray fracturing the sunlight like a miniature rainbow. You cup your hands, the water's cold shock ripping through you. Jeremiah collapses beside you, head lolling. You catch him, easing him onto a sunlit ledge. His skin is clammy, his breath ragged. You scrawl short prayers in the mud, silently pleading for intervention, remembering that in Section 10's parley, Aboriginal elders offered water a gift from the land. You glance around. No Aboriginal guides inhabit this part of the bush so thoroughly, but you consider implementing bush survival skills, compressing wet leaves as bandages, applying mud poultices for Jeremiah's shin wound, and teaching him to nibble on small green berries, half remembered from a convict's diary note as edible. Historians still argue whether such berries were safe or occasionally toxic, a roulette wheel of flora. You tear a strip from your damp shirt to fashion a headband for Jeremiah, his fevered brow pressing into soaked fabric. You light a small fire from dry gum twigs overhead, careful to inhale little smoke that blackened lungs just as surely as colonial flogging did. Flames flare, fueling a brew of rainwater and gum tea, a concoction rumored among convicts to quell queasiness and stave off infection. You nibble a few leaves, then offer Jeremiah the brew in a battered tin cup. He sips, grimacing at the bitter tang, but eats more than he has in days. You note the slump of relief in his shoulders, the flimsiest anchor against the wild's relentless pull. A rustle in undergrowth freezes you in place. Your heart twists into a tight knot. Could it be trackers? Desperation flips thoughts. Are you ready to face a gun's muzzle for brothers saved rather than delivered? You stand stepping between Jeremiah and the noise as Isaac kneels to refill the water pan. From the brush emerges a wiry figure, Aboriginal man, clad in possum skin cloak, hair streaked with ash, an ochre face unreadable. He lifts a spear foot poised on a root, steady as any colonial soldier's bayonet. Your chest constricts, a rifle shot still might be preferable to stumbling into a tribal execution. But the man lowers his spear slightly, not an invitation, but a probationary truce. You lean forward, invoking the few words of pidgin you picked up during Section 10's parley. No fight. Brothers lost. Hungry. The Aboriginal elder's gaze flickers, and he tosses his spear aside, a white ember of acceptance in his movement, and produces a gourd strung from bark. Inside a wad of cured kangaroo tail and dried fish, he snaps off half a chunk, palming it across to you. Silence sharpens the crackle of gum bark. In the modest fire, Jeremiah's ragged breathing, the distant thunder's muted growl. You tuck a chunk of meat into Jeremiah's shaking hand. It's survival distilled into a gesture as profound as any treaty. The elder then beckons you to follow him off the ridge, away from gun trails and settler roads, to a hidden nook in the bush where his kin gather. You hesitate. The history of convicts and Aboriginal clans oscillates between helpful alliances and violent reprisal. Yet a primal feeling instinct, more than reason, urges you forward. You slide Jeremiah into a crouch, whispering, "Trust the word as fragile as a soap bubble in gale winds." Isaac mirrors your nod, and together you rise. The elder guides you downhill through a tunnel of tea trees to a shallow cave set into a sandstone overhang. Inside, Two women dressed in ochre-painted bark skirts cradle infants swaddled in kangaroo fur blankets. They tune their gaze to survival's sacred rhythm. No flash of anger, only cautious hospitality. A chorus of children's giggles resonates in the dim children whose laughter ripples like living water. The elder sits on a rock hearth, indicates you follow suit, and offers a stone bowl of water, sweetened with ground wattle seeds and native delicacy, while he scours Jeremiah's shin wound with chewed eucalyptus leaves. The antiseptic sap oozes into the gash, easing raw sting. You feel a rush of gratitude from yesterday's desperation to this sanctuary's quiet mercy. For a moment, the notion that freedom exists beyond colonial chains flickers in your chest like a candle in the wind. The women, gentle as wind-blown grasses, share dot points of bush lore, how to fashion fish hooks from turtle shell, which berries nourish without killing, and where to track goanna trails by their triangular footprints. As you memorize signals etched into the elder's face, like how he pointed to specific constellations to navigate your own survival's blueprint, unfolds the bush, speaking its voice, guiding your bare feet. Night falls, and the Aboriginal clan kindles a smoky fire seasoned with fragrant native basil. The children circle you, studying your alien face with curious eyes. You manage a tired smile, recalling Section 10's parley laughter. This moment echoes a fragile echo of cross-cultural kinship. The elder dips into a kangaroo hide and produces a small gum seed boil that in water he signals to quell thirst. You scoop the seeds into Jeremiah's cupped hands, watching as he cradles hope against his fever. Moonlight filters in, illuminating bark walls adorned with ochre handprints, imprints of countless souls who sought refuge here long before the first fleet anchored off Botany Bay. You feel a shiver for every convict who glimpsed freedom's horizon scores, perished in drought, famine, or fallacious trust. Here in the cave, generation upon generation forged communion with land. You sense your own soul, anchored by belonging, if only briefly. As embers glow blue beneath star-swept sky, you practice scraping a charred stick across limestone, tracing crude lines of a map on cave wall. The river's winding path, a gorge of stepped cliffs, and a hidden oasis where lilies bloom despite the scorched earth above. You mark safe routes to gather witchetty grubs and paths to avoid venomous snakes, each line a promise to evade the colonial noose. Jeremiah drifts to sleep, his breathing, even today's medicine, stronger than any convict doctor's potion. You lay beside him back against cool rock and watch Isaac fashion a simple spear mimicking the elder's design, black wattle shaft tipped with sharpened iron scavenged from a broken convict tool. You consider the steel's weight in your hand a symbol of your own brutal ingenuity. Distant thunder's rumble segues into the lullaby of cicadas singing beneath moonlight, a hymn older than any settler's creed. You close your eyes, letting the elder's footfalls fade into darkness, carrying you toward dreams hollowed free of iron and law. For once, freedom tastes like gummy leaves, and sweat of flavor convicts could never savor behind walls. You drift into unsleep, an ember of resolve kindling in your chest. Tomorrow you trek deeper toward promised southern rivers. You carry with you the gift of this clan's mercy, a fire of knowledge capable of lighting a path through uncharted lands. But you also carry the gravest truth: any step forward risks discovery or death. Yet here, beneath star-forged ceiling bathed in smoky embers and whispers of ancient kinship, you glimpse a world beyond the hangman's gallows and convict chain, a world where survival depends on respect, humility, and an unwavering will to keep walking no matter the storm. You rise before sunrise dew, beating on the gum fronds like 1,000 tiny lanterns, guiding you deeper into a land unfettered by colonial chains. Today, you push southward, following a ridge that slopes toward the Tasman Sea, a distant promise of passage beyond this penal nightmare. You probably won't survive this stretch without picturing jagged cliffs looming ahead, each swallow of salt wind threatening to carry you back to the convict's lash. A mainstream historical fact by the 1820s, some escaped convicts reached ports in Van Diemen's Land, modern Tasmania, often relying on stolen boats forging new lives as settlers or bushrangers. You slide from your makeshift shelter, Jeremiah's shallow breathing the only sound. The elders' clan is stirring with morning rites, women preparing bulbous gourds of yams, men fashioning woomeras to fling spears at wallabies grazing at the forest's edge. You bow low, offering thanks, and the elder nods no words, needed the gift of shelter and knowledge sealed in mutual respect. As you shoulder your meager bag, you recall Section 14's lessons: water from hidden gullies, edible roots, ripping hunger from your belly, and now the bush offers a final aid, a narrow game trail marked by scraped bark on a scribbly gum. A fringed tidbit: some escaped convicts smeared kangaroo grease on their faces to appear as phantom spirits hoping to scare tracking dogs. Historians still argue whether this effectively baffled trackers or simply amused Aboriginal trackers who recognized the ruse. Isaac leads Jeremiah along the game trail. Low branches brush their shoulders and the undergrowth crackles underfoot. Sunlight filters through foliage in shifting patterns, guiding you like a terrestrial compass. Your heart churns with every snap of twig fear that trackers might have followed the elder's tip or even betrayed you. You remember Section 13's frantic creek foray, where a bullet whizzed past, ripping hope from your chest. Now hope surfaces as you edge closer to the coast. You push aside a curtain of vines and find a clearing, a narrow inlet, waves lapping against pebbles strewn like bone fragments. Beyond, a jagged promontory juts into roiling sea, its silhouette etched in violet dawn. You taste salt on your lips, a baptism of freedom's last frontier. You crouch by the water's edge, cupping your hands to drink the brine-laced spray and pack a handful of driftwood for a signal fire. Jeremiah collapses onto sun-warmed rock, the bandage on his shin soaked with dried eucalyptus sap. You press another handful of yam tubers into his unresisting hand fuel for the trek ahead. Isaac scavenges for flotsam shards of driftwood, an empty canvas bag snagged on a low-hanging branch, and a battered rusted can that might be transforming into a crude fishing pot. Together, you craft a makeshift raft, a flimsy platform of lopped branches bound with bark rope. The tide is rising, promising to carry you southward toward unknown coves, and possibly the convict-built settlement at Port Arthur. As you lash the final branch, the tide ebbs from its high watermark exposing slick seaweed and barnacle-clad rocks. The sun climbs rippling gold across the inlet. You glimpse a hulk of a British cutter beyond the headland convicts on board, unaware of your plans. Their chained clinking anchors the notion that even if you cross water, the colony's reach extends like octopus tentacles. You swallow disbelief and stoke the wind's favor, knowing the slightest miscalculation could strand you on razor-edged rocks. A gust rips down the inlet, and you push your makeshift craft onto the wet sand. Jeremiah's strength flags, but you jab your foot into his back, urging him forward. He stumbles, but obeys. You hoist him onto the raft first, then Isaac follows. You climb aboard, last heart pounding, as wood shifts beneath your weight, each movement a risk of capsizing. You prod the raft with a spruce branch navigating toward deeper water. The current tugs with greed, dragging you past rocks etched by ancient tides, echoes of a continuum far older than convicts' laments. Waves buffeting the raft spray salt into your eyes. You blink away stinging tears. Jeremiah grips the side body, quivering his shallow breaths, filling the space with shared dread. In the distance, the cutter's silhouette looms closer, its mast a jutting spine against sky. You paddle with makeshift oars, launching the raft into open water. Your legs tremble, tangling in side brush. If one limb snaps, you plunge beneath waves and vanish without trace. Yet you press on, recalling Section 12's gambling stakes. This is your final wager, life or death, on currents and chance. As you cast off, the cutter's crew spots you. A horn blasts a shrill note, cutting through morning's chorus. Your heart clenches. Jeremiah's head lolls. You tug his arm, urging, "Keep paddling." You strain every sinew, the water's resistance like iron bands around your wrists. Isaac stands at the bow, waving a tattered shirt, a pale banner of desperation. Behind, oars scratch like bones against the ship's flanks as a pursuit vessel unties itself, carrying armed Marines. You scan the horizon, rocky islands dot the seascape like wolves' howls. If you cling to shelter, you risk circling back to colonial jaws. You opt for open sea, trusting seas, boundless reach. Each paddle stroke propels you further from civil law, but closer to nature's jury. Sharks lurk in deeper water, hidden beneath glassy swells. You recall Section 14's Aboriginal lessons where to spot signs of currents. But here, the knowledge is thinner. The sea's memory stretches beyond human record, a tomb for shipwrecked souls and driftwood wonders. The cutter's sail fills catching wind that roars across the water. Its bow surges forward, tracking your escape like a hound, closing on quarry. You turn your head, seeing Marines aim muskets across the water, blunderbusses primed. You shout prayers under your breath, "Saint Peter, guide my oars." The cutter's foghorn barks again, a mechanical beast's roar that echoes across waves. You sense the inlet safety slipping behind you as you barrel into open gulf. A heavy boom, a warning shot cracks above, and shards of seawater flick against your face. Isaac ducks. Jeremiah's eyes widen, tears mingling with salt. You commit every breath to prayer, every muscle to prayer. The ocean swell rises, rocking your raft like a cradle of doom. You brace for the tide's next push, willing your paddles to cut through black-blue waves. You glimpse a narrow gap between two islands, Chartreuse Rock on star charts, where cliffs rise like grim sentinels. If you steer through that gap, tides will carry you southward beyond immediate pursuit. Yet the passage narrows to a rocky bottleneck, reefs concealed beneath shifting surge. You guide Isaac to row diagonally, heart racing, as the raft shudders against a submerged boulder. You nearly pitch forward into water. Jeremiah cries out, his feverish, weak voice lost in wind's roar. A third blast echoes, more distant maybe, because your blood-heat paddling outruns the cutter's drift. By the time you clear the reef, the cutter's hull dwarfs the horizon, its sails like mammoth wings no longer in range. You slump forward, gulping in briny air, tasting freedom's cost on your tongue. You drift through Chartreuse Rock Gap, emerging into open sea's turquoise embrace. You spot palm-studded islets beyond, rumored safe havens where escaped convicts once found refuge with sealers and whalers. Yet the risk here is dual forging new alliances, might secure life or entangle you in fresh violence. You signal Isaac and Jeremiah land. From here, you'll beach the raft on the nearest cove and follow a worn kangaroo path toward a settler-free settlement known to harbor refuge-seeking outlaws. You know, rumor suggests the loyalty of bush rangers in these parts ensures a warm fire and a silent nod. Yet alliance with bush rangers carries its own peril gunpowder politics that slice as deep as colonial laws lash. Historians still argue whether bushranger collusion offered convict fugitives genuine sanctuary or simply sealed their fates through violent sisterhoods. You guide the raft toward a sheltered shore. A quarter mile away, the water gradually shallowing to moss-green hues. The sun's heat intensifies, glinting off water in shards like fractured diamonds. Jeremiah slumps, burned by fever and cold alike. You lift him from the raft, carrying him across sun-warmed sand toward a cluster of cabbage tree palms. Isaac follows close, his arms shaking from paddling's punishment. You set Jeremiah beneath a tree's shade and produce a handful of berries you identified. The elder taught small green fruits that, when mashed with water, help reduce fevers. You coax them into Jeremiah's slack palm. He raises them to his lips, sighing as bitter-sweet tang spreads through him. Above, a pair of black cockatoos scream, circling overhead as if heralding your arrival. You take that as a sign nature's emissaries, guiding you from colonial hell toward possible dawn. You look south, miles of cliffs and scrub stretch out a jagged horizon. You sense companions stirring, a heavily built man wielding a cutlass, another with a flintlock emerging from a scrub-lined camp. Bush rangers. You steel your stance, recalling Section 10's parley that urged respectful greeting rituals. You wave your empty hands skyward, a universal sign of truce. They approach cautiously, stern faces crisscrossed with scars, eyes trained on your tattered clothes and the feeble figure at your feet. Their leader, a legendary figure named Mary Ann the Razor, for her notorious skill, regards you with curious appraisal. Your skin prickles as she notices Jeremiah's fevered state. Her lips curl into a wry smile. Another landlubber arrives on the tide, begging for mercy. You voice your plea, help us please. We flee colonial chains, nothing but land. Jeremiah's near death. She casts a glance at Isaac, then at the scraps of food and water around him. Without a word, she signals to her band. Armored in animal hides, they guide you deeper into the coconut pines, where a crude lean-to proffers place to rest. You glance back at the distant cutter's silhouette shrinking beneath drifting clouds, and exhale the first real breath since your escape began. Inside their campwood, smoke curls around kettle steam, and the robust aroma of slow-roasted wallaby drifts through the air, mingling with eucalyptus's pungent bite. The bush rangers offer you and Jeremiah bowls of stew thick with herbs and a pouch of dried goanna meat. You accept with trembling gratitude memories of salt pork and scorched bones fading like old nightmares. As night deepens, you watch firelight dance across faces etched with grit and rebellion. Mary Ann invites you to sit by the embers, clasping a battered tin cup for you to share. She tells you of others who escaped and perished, warning that freedom demands unending vigilance. You nod aware each new sunrise could deliver trackers or famine. Yet in this circle of outlaws, you taste a different covenant, one not penned in colonial law, but bound by bush code, where loyalty is paid in shared fire and mutual protection. You close your eyes, letting embers glow fade into dreams embroidered with eucalyptus scent and the fierce loyalty of those you now call accomplices. You realize that survival is not a solitary conquest, but a song sung by many voices, each adding a note of resilience against oppression. The final embers of firelight wane, and you feel darkness cradle you in its gentle arms like a mother's care for a child returned home. Let your breathing slow each inhale and exhale, a measured reassurance that though the world may mistrust you, you remain alive. Picture the camp's fire turning ember-gray embers, drifting upward into a sky studded with silent stars. Let those stars remind you that across continents and eras, souls have looked heavenward for solace, each flame a flicker of hope. Feel your body warm against sleeping companions whose breaths rise and fall in unison, a testament to shared survival. Release the tension knotted in your shoulders, once locked by fear of lash, bullet, or drought, and imagine it unraveling, dissolving into the fragrant night air. Let the scent of eucalyptus and wood smoke lull your thoughts, each note a balm to frayed nerves. Recall the convict's chain at your ankle, now a distant echo beneath starlight. Picture it lying abandoned, swallowed by the bush's forgiving embrace. Allow a smile to rise as you consider the irony. Your quest for freedom led you into a world that demands greater vigilance, yet offers raw beauty and kinship unchained by law. In this quiet, know that even if tomorrow brings new uncertainties, tracking dogs, fevered nights, or storms that soak you to the bone, you have tasted courage and community in this sacred wilderness. Now, imagine drifting toward sleep, carried by the gentle chorus of cicadas and the rhythmic hush of distant surf. Let your final thought be this: in a world where survival demands grit and guile, you have found an ember of humanity glowing in the darkest bush. You rest beneath a canopy of ancient trees, secure in the knowledge that your story, woven from fear and defiance, begins anew with every sunrise. Sweet dream. End of script. Sweet dream.